Step out of the vehicle, or I will remove you from it myself. The flashlight beam hit Marcus Adeyemi square in the eyes, not the quick sweep of a routine check, but a deliberate, sustained blind, the kind of light meant to disorient, to establish dominance before a single question had been asked. The deputy's free hand rested on his holster, not gripping, not drawing, just touching. The universal language of a man who wanted you to know what he could do if you gave him a reason, or even if you didn't. A black couple on a dark Tennessee highway, a deputy who hadn't asked for license or registration, and a dash cam already streaming encrypted video to a server the deputy would never know existed. He had chosen the wrong car on the wrong stretch of road, and in about 40 minutes, his entire department was going to find out exactly how wrong. Narrator, Saturday, March 8th, 9:07 p.m. Highway 231, Rutherford County, Tennessee, a 2-lane stretch of asphalt that cut through farmland and nothing between Murfreesboro and Shelbyville. No streetlights, no businesses, no witnesses except for the occasional pair of headlights passing in the opposite lane and disappearing into the dark. Marcus Adeyemi had been driving this road for 6 months, not because it was the fastest route to anywhere he needed to go, but because it ran through the jurisdiction he was investigating. 6 months of weekend drives, 6 months of data collection, 6 months of building a case file that grew thicker every week, and tonight the case had come to him. Camille sat in the passenger seat, her surgical bag on the floor between her feet, her phone face down on her thigh. They'd spent the evening at a colleague's retirement dinner in Shelbyville. Lamb, bad wine, a speech that went 15 minutes too long. She'd changed out of her scrubs into a navy dress that still carried the faint smell of the hospital's antiseptic underneath her perfume. 12 hours on her feet, 2 emergency consultations, and a surgery that had lasted 4 hours longer than planned. She was tired, not the kind of tired that came from a long day. The kind that settled into bone, into posture, into the way her head leaned against the window, and her eyes tracked the white lane markings with the unfocused stare of someone whose mind had already started shutting down for the night. The blue lights appeared without warning. No siren, no PA announcement, just the sudden eruption of strobing color against the rearview mirror, turning the inside of their Honda Accord into a pulsing theater of blue and white. Marcus checked his speed, 53 in a 55 zone. He checked his headlights, on, taillights, functioning, registration sticker, current through October. He checked his mirrors with a systematic sweep that moved left, center, right in 2 seconds flat, the kind of scan that had nothing to do with civilian driving habits and everything to do with 14 years of training he hadn't turned off since the day he'd earned it. Pull over? Camille straightened in her seat, blinking away the haze of near sleep. Already am? Marcus eased the Accord onto the gravel shoulder, tires crunching on loose stone. He put the car in park, turned off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, visible, still, deliberate. Camille reached for the glove compartment. Not yet. Marcus's voice was calm, instructional. Hands visible. Wait for him to approach. Don't reach for anything until he asks. She looked at him. The kind of look that carried 12 years of marriage in it. Part question, part trust, part the quiet resignation of a black woman who understood that a traffic stop on a dark highway in rural Tennessee was not a neutral event. She placed her hands on her lap, palms up, and waited. Asterisk, asterisk. If this story already has your pulse racing, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what this deputy does next will leave you speechless. Asterisk, asterisk. 45 seconds passed. The patrol car's door didn't open. Marcus watched in the rearview mirror as the deputy sat in his vehicle, illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen, running the plates. Standard procedure. Except standard procedure should take 15 to 20 seconds with modern NCIC terminals, and this deputy was taking his time. 60 seconds, 70, 80. Camille's fingers twitched against her thigh. Marcus didn't move, didn't adjust his hands, didn't turn around. 14 years had taught him that patience was its own form of armor, and impatience was an invitation that men with badges sometimes accepted with enthusiasm. At 93 seconds, the patrol car's door opened. A boot hit gravel, then another. Heavy footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. The walk of a man who wanted you to hear him coming before you saw him, who wanted the anticipation to do half his work. The flashlight hit the driver's window before the deputy reached it. That sustained, blinding beam. Not a quick check of the interior. A weapon. Step out of the vehicle, or I will remove you from it myself. The voice came from behind the light, deep, flat, stripped of anything resembling professional courtesy. No good evening. No license and registration. No stated reason for the stop. Marcus kept his hands on the wheel. "Officer, may I ask the reason for the stop?" The flashlight shifted, swept across Camille, lingered on her face, her dress, her hands, then back to Marcus. "I'm not going to ask twice." The beam dropped just enough for Marcus to make out the silhouette. Tall, wide-shouldered, the utility belt loaded heavy. The nameplate on the right breast pocket caught a sliver of reflected light. Gunnerson. "I'm going to reach for my door handle with my left hand." Marcus narrated his own movements, a practice that should never be necessary but had become survival protocol for black men during traffic stops. "I'm opening the door now." He stepped out slowly, hands visible, movements telegraphed. Wade Gunnerson stood 6'4" and carried himself like a man who'd memorized his own reflection in gym mirrors. 34 years old, though the hardness around his eyes suggested someone who'd aged past that in temperament, if not biology. The Rutherford County Sheriff's Office patch on his left shoulder. The body camera on his chest, red indicator light off, not recording. Marcus noted that immediately. The camera was powered on. The small green standby light confirmed that. But the recording function was inactive, a conscious choice. The kind of choice that preceded things a deputy didn't want documented. "Hands on the hood," Gunnerson gestured with the flashlight, directing Marcus toward the front of the Accord. "Spread your feet." "I'd like to know the reason for the stop before—" "Hands on the hood." The volume doubled. The flashlight swung toward Marcus's face again, close enough that the metal rim nearly grazed his cheek. Marcus placed his hands on the hood. The metal was still warm from the engine. He spread his feet to shoulder width. Behind him, he could hear Camille's sharp intake of breath through the open driver's door. Gunnerson kicked Marcus's right ankle outward, widening his stance another 6 inches. Not gently. The kind of kick that left a bruise on the ankle bone, that made the knee hyperextend slightly, that communicated contempt through the precise application of force to a joint that couldn't resist without making things worse. "You know why I pulled you over?" "No, sir, I do not." "This vehicle matches a description on a drug trafficking alert. Dark sedan, Tennessee plates, southbound on 231. Marcus absorbed the statement. Filed it. The description was uselessly vague. Dark sedan with Tennessee plates could match several thousand vehicles on any given Saturday night. And drug trafficking alerts were broadcast with make, model, color, and partial plate numbers. Not just dark sedan, which meant the alert was either fabricated or didn't exist at all. "My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment," Marcus said. "My wife can provide them if you'd like." "Your wife?" Gunnerson leaned forward, angling his head to look through the open door at Camille. "She can stay right where she is and keep her hands where I can see them. You, don't move." He walked to the passenger side, tapped the window with the flashlight, hard enough to make Camille flinch. She lowered the window manually, the old crank mechanism making its familiar grinding sound. "Evening, ma'am." The courtesy was performative, thin as paper. "Your husband always this difficult during traffic stops?" "He asked you a question," Camille said. Her voice carried the particular steadiness of a woman who'd spent 20 years watching her father come home in an NYPD uniform and understood both sides of this dynamic with a clarity that most civilians never developed. "What was the reason for the stop?" Gunnerson's jaw shifted. The flashlight beam dropped to Camille's surgical bag on the floor. "What's in the bag?" "Medical equipment. I'm a surgeon." "Open it." "Not without knowing the reason for this stop and whether I'm legally obligated to comply." She didn't raise her voice. Didn't challenge. Stated the boundary the way she stated surgical parameters. As fact, not opinion. Gunnerson straightened up. The thin courtesy evaporated completely. He walked back to Marcus, still spread against the hood, and placed one hand flat between Marcus's shoulder blades. "Here's what's going to happen." The hand pushed downward, forcing Marcus's chest closer to the hood. "I'm going to search this vehicle. If you cooperate, this goes smooth. If you or your wife give me one more word of attitude, I'm calling backup, and this turns into something neither of you want." Marcus felt the pressure against his spine, felt the hood's warmth against his forearms, felt the particular humiliation of being pressed face down against his own car while his wife watched from the passenger seat. And he felt, beneath the left interior pocket of his jacket, the weight of the credential case he carried everywhere. The case that contained the gold badge and laminated identification card of a supervisory special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The case that, if Gunnerson had asked to see identification instead of ordering him onto the hood, would have ended this encounter before it started. But Gunnerson hadn't asked, and Marcus wasn't going to volunteer. Not yet. Not until the man standing behind him had committed enough violations to make the case file sitting in the Memphis field office not just compelling, but airtight. So he pressed his hands flat against the warm metal and waited. Narrator. 8 days earlier, the The investigation had entered a phase that the Bureau classified as imminent action threshold, the point where accumulated evidence justified tactical deployment, but political considerations required additional documentation before a federal grand jury would return indictments. Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Adeyemi had spent 14 years with the FBI, the last 6 in the Civil Rights Division out of the Memphis field office. West Point graduate, class of 2007, 4 years Army intelligence before transitioning to federal law enforcement, the kind of career trajectory that looked clean on paper but carried scars that paper couldn't record. Nights in Kandahar, briefings in windowless rooms, the particular education that comes from learning how power operates when it believes no one is watching. His current assignment was Operation HIGHLINE, a multi-county investigation into patterns of racially motivated traffic stops across Middle Tennessee. 6 months of data collection, 347 documented stops across Rutherford, Bedford, and Coffee counties. Analysis showing that Black and Latino drivers were stopped at rates 8.3 times higher than white drivers on the same roads during the same hours, with no corresponding disparity in contraband recovery rates. The numbers told one story. The individual case files told another. Darker, more specific, harder to reduce to statistics. Drivers who were stopped, searched, had personal property damage during the search, and then released without citation or arrest. Drivers whose complaints to Internal Affairs were classified as unfounded within 72 hours. Drivers who found that their vehicles had been impounded on fabricated grounds and released only after paying fees that functioned as extortion. And in 4 cases, 4 that Marcus's team had documented with witness statements, medical records, and 1 surviving dashcam recording. Drivers who had been physically assaulted during stops and then charged with resisting arrest or obstruction to justify the injuries. Wade Gunnerson's name appeared in the case file 17 times, more than any other deputy in the 3-county investigation area. His stop and search patterns were textbook racial profiling. Same stretch of Highway 231, same Saturday night time frame, same vague justifications about drug trafficking alerts or equipment violations or erratic driving that never appeared in the dashcam footage the department claimed had been corrupted. Marcus had driven Highway 231 on 6 consecutive Saturday nights specifically to determine whether Gunnerson would target him. The first 5 drives had been uneventful. Different shifts, Gunnerson's patrol area reassigned, simple bad luck in a jurisdiction that ran 4 deputies across 200 square miles on weekend nights. Tonight was the 6th drive, and tonight, Gunnerson had finally found them. Narrator. The search began with the trunk. Gunnerson ordered Marcus to remain against the hood, hands flat, feet spread, and walk to the rear of the vehicle. Marcus heard the trunk latch release, the hydraulic arm hissing as the lid rose. Camille's suitcase was inside, a box of medical journals she'd been meaning to drop at the hospital library. Emergency road kit, flares, jumper cables, a reflective triangle. The spare tire and jack in their factory compartment. Nothing illegal, nothing suspicious, nothing that would justify the next 40 minutes. But Marcus knew, from 6 months of case files, from witness statements, from the pattern that had brought him to this highway in the first place, that the contents of the trunk didn't matter. What mattered was what the trunk would contain after Gunnerson finished searching it. He heard the suitcase unzipped, heard the rustling of fabric as Gunnerson rifled through Camille's folded clothes with the disregard of a man handling evidence rather than someone's personal belongings. Heard the box of journals hit the road shoulder as it was removed and tossed aside. Then silence. 3 seconds. 5. 7. And Marcus heard something he'd read about in 4 separate witness statements, but had never personally witnessed. A soft crinkle of plastic. Brief. Almost inaudible. The sound of a small bag being introduced to a space that hadn't contained it 30 seconds earlier. Well, well. Gunnerson's boots crunched back toward the driver's side. He held a small Ziploc bag between his thumb and index finger, the flashlight angled to illuminate its contents. Dried green plant material, approximately 2 grams by visual estimate, sealed in a 2x3-inch bag. Want to explain this? Marcus looked at the bag without turning his body. His hands remained on the hood. That was not in my vehicle. Found it in your trunk, tucked under the spare tire cover. You saying it planted itself? I'm saying it was not in my vehicle when we left Shelbyville 45 minutes ago. Gunnerson tucked the bag into an evidence pouch on his belt with the practiced ease of a man who'd performed this particular magic trick before. Marijuana possession. Schedule 6 under Tennessee Code annotated. Section 39-17-418. That's a Class A misdemeanor, friend. Up to 11 months and 29 days. He said it from memory. Smooth. Rehearsed. The statute citation delivered like a line in the script he'd performed many times. Turn around. Hands behind your back. "You're arresting me based on contraband you introduced to my vehicle." Marcus's voice remained level. Not accusatory. Observational. The tone of a man describing what he saw, rather than protesting what was happening to him. "I want to be clear about what's occurring for any recording devices currently active." Gunnerson's hand closed around Marcus's left wrist and wrenched it behind his back. The cuff clicked shut, 2 clicks tighter than necessary, the metal edge biting into the base of his palm. "You want to be clear?" Gunnerson leaned close enough that Marcus could smell the wintergreen dip on his breath. "Let me be clear. You're under arrest. Your wife's about to be under arrest if she doesn't stop reaching for that phone. And this night is going to go exactly the way I decide it goes." He grabbed Marcus's right wrist and cuffed it. The ratchet mechanism closed 4 clicks, well past snug, into the territory of deliberate pain. Marcus felt the metal compress the tendons, felt the immediate tingling in his fingertips as circulation began to restrict. Then Gunnerson spun him around and slammed his back against the car. The impact traveled through his shoulder blades, his spine, the base of his skull. The Accord rocked on its suspension. "Stay." He walked to the passenger side, opened the door without asking, reached across Camille, and grabbed her phone from the center console. "Hey, that's my property." Camille's hand shot out instinctively, catching the phone's edge before Gunnerson could pull it away. For 1 second, their hands occupied the same space, her fingers on the phone case, his wrapped around the phone itself. A tug of war measured in fractions of inches and entire galaxies of power imbalance. Gunnerson yanked the phone free and slid it into his back pocket. "Evidence seizure incident to arrest. My husband hasn't been convicted of anything. That phone is my personal property and you have no—" "Ma'am," the word landed like a slap. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." "On what charge?" "Interference with a lawful arrest. Obstruction. Pick one." He gripped her forearm and pulled her from the seat in a single motion. Not a gentle assistance, but a forceful extraction. The kind that left finger-shaped bruises on dark skin where the pressure points compressed muscle against bone. Camille stumbled as her feet hit the gravel, her balance disrupted by the sudden transition from seated to standing, from passenger to suspect. She caught herself against the open door. The surgical bag spilled from the floor onto the ground, instruments clattering against each other inside the padded case. "Hands behind your back. I'm cooperating. You don't need to—" The cuffs closed before she finished the sentence. Same excessive tightness, same deliberate positioning of the metal edge against the most sensitive part of the wrist. Same message delivered through hardware instead of words. "I control you." Marcus watched from the front of the vehicle, hands cuffed behind his back, shoulder blades aching where they'd hit the car, fingers already numbing from the restricted circulation, watching his wife, a woman who had held human hearts in her hands and put them back together, who had spent 12 hours saving lives before getting into this car, standing on a gravel shoulder in a navy dress with her hands cuffed behind her and a deputy's flashlight in her face. He filed the image, filed the timestamp, filed the sequence of events in the same organized mental structure he used for case documentation, chronological, detailed, admissible. And he noted for the second time that Gunnerson's body camera was still not recording. Narrator. The radio crackled at 9:22 p.m. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. Be advised the vehicle on your stop, Tennessee plate Bravo Kilo 479er, shows a possible match to Bolo 273, drug interdiction. Proceed with caution." The voice was a female, middle-aged, delivered with the flat affect of someone reading from a script rather than responding to real-time information. Jolene Prater, dispatch supervisor, 23 years with Rutherford County, the kind of institutional knowledge that made her indispensable, and the kind of loyalty to the current administration that made her complicit. Marcus heard the broadcast through the patrol car's open windows and processed it immediately. Bolo 273. He'd reviewed every active Bolo in the Middle Tennessee region as part of Operation HIGHLINE's weekly intelligence briefings. There was no Bolo 273. The numbering sequence had reached 268 as of Friday's update, which meant one of two things. Either a new Bolo had been issued in the last 36 hours that hadn't been uploaded to the federal shared database, or the dispatch call was fabricated, a retroactive justification being built in real time, documented on the radio log, designed to support whatever Gunnerson was about to claim he'd found. Marcus knew which one it was. He'd seen this pattern before, documented in 8 previous stops where Prater's dispatch records contradicted the actual Bolo database. A shadow system. The deputy created the pretext on the road. The dispatcher created the paper trail from the office. Coordinated, practiced. Almost impossible to catch unless you had access to both the county radio logs and the federal Bolo database simultaneously. Marcus had access to both. "Copy, dispatch." Gunnerson keyed his shoulder mic. Contraband located in the vehicle. 2 suspects in custody. Requesting backup for transport. Copy Unit 7. Unit 12 en route. ETA 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Marcus noted that too. Unit 12 was Sergeant Patty Lockhart, shift supervisor, the person who determined the official narrative of this stop from the supervisory level. 8 minutes before the story solidified. 8 minutes before additional witnesses, law enforcement witnesses, the kind who'd corroborate each other's statements with the precision of a rehearsed script, arrived to lock everything in place. Gunnerson holstered his flashlight and approached Marcus. Here's how this works. I'm going to search the rest of the vehicle. You and your wife are going to stand here and be quiet. When my sergeant arrives, we transport you to the annex for processing. Simple night. Nobody gets hurt. The last 3 words carried weight, not a reassurance, a conditional threat. Nobody gets hurt, as long as you comply, as long as you don't make me do what I'm clearly prepared to do. I want to speak with your supervisor, Marcus said. And I want confirmation that your body camera is recording this encounter. Gunnerson's expression shifted, a micro-reaction, barely visible in the ambient light from the patrol car, but readable if you'd been trained to read faces in low-light conditions during interrogation settings. Surprise, quickly suppressed. Not at the request itself, but at the specificity. The body camera reference. Civilians didn't usually notice whether the camera was on or off. They didn't know to ask. Camera's functioning fine? The lie was smooth, automatic. And my supervisor is already en route. You'll meet her in about 7 minutes. He turned his back on Marcus, a deliberate gesture of dismissal, and began searching the interior of the Accord. Glove compartment first. He pulled out the registration folder, flipped through it without reading, tossed it on the driver's seat. Insurance card, same treatment. Owner's manual, a package of tissues. Then the center console, sunglasses case, a phone charger cable, 3 quarters and a dime in the change tray, a small bottle of hand sanitizer that Camille kept for post-hospital decontamination. Gunnerson held up the sanitizer. What's this? Hand sanitizer. Camille's voice was tight but controlled. 60% ethanol. Available at every pharmacy in Tennessee. He unscrewed the cap, sniffed it, squeezed a drop onto his finger, rubbed it, smelled it again, then dropped it on the floor mat. We'll see. The back seat came next. He pulled up the floor mats, checked under both front seats by feel, ran his hands along the seams of the upholstery with the thoroughness of someone looking for something he already knew wasn't there. Because the performance of the search mattered as much as its results. The search established probable cause in the narrative. The search made the planted evidence seem like a discovery rather than a deposit. Marcus watched all of it, cataloged all of it, and wondered, for the first time that night, whether Gunnerson would find the dash cam. The camera was mounted behind the rearview mirror, a compact unit, matte black, designed to blend with the mirror housing. It was a consumer model modified by the FBI's Technical Operations Division to include encrypted cellular streaming capability. Every frame it captured was simultaneously recorded to a local memory card and transmitted via encrypted signal to a secure server at the Memphis field office, where the duty agent monitored feeds from active operations around the clock. The duty agent tonight was Special Agent Tomas Rueda, 29 years old, 3 years with the Bureau, sharp enough to have been assigned to HIGHLINE as his first major case. He was watching the feed right now. Had been watching since the blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror 7 minutes ago. He was also, per protocol, recording timestamps, logging visible badge numbers, and preparing the preliminary notification to ASAC Denise Okafor that the investigation had entered a live tactical phase. Gunnerson didn't find the camera. He searched the console, the visors, the glove box under both seats, the trunk again. But he didn't look at the rearview mirror, didn't examine the small black rectangle mounted flush against its housing, didn't notice the tiny green LED that indicated active transmission, a half-inch piece of technology, invisible in plain sight, recording every word and every action, the thing that would end his career, and he walked right past it. Narrator. Sergeant Patty Lockhart arrived at 9:30 p.m. in a department SUV that she parked at an angle behind Gunnerson's patrol car, adding another set of emergency lights to the display that was now visible from a quarter mile in both directions. Any passing driver would see the light show and assume something serious was happening. A drug bust, an accident, a felony stop. The visual language of law enforcement authority deployed to maximum effect on a stretch of highway where there was no one to impress except the 2 people in handcuffs. Lockhart was 47, compact, her graying brown hair pulled into a regulation bun that emphasized the angles of a face built for skepticism. She'd been with Rutherford County for 19 years, the last 7 as shift supervisor, long enough to have outlasted 3 sheriffs and to have built a network of loyalty and leverage that made her the most politically insulated person in the department, below the elected sheriff himself. She assessed the scene as she approached. The Accord on the shoulder, trunk open, interior searched. Marcus cuffed at the front of the vehicle. Camille cuffed at the passenger side. Gunnerson standing between them with the evidence pouch on his belt and the satisfied posture of a hunter who'd bagged something worth mounting. "What do we have?" She directed the question to Gunnerson, not to the people in handcuffs. "Standard practice. Establishing the chain of information, filtering everything through the arresting officer's narrative before the subjects had a chance to present their version. Traffic stop on 231. Vehicle matched the drug bolo. Located approximately 2 grams marijuana in the trunk, concealed under the spare tire cover. Both subjects became hostile during the stop. Male subject refused to comply with orders. Female subject attempted to interfere with evidence seizure. Lockhart looked at Marcus, then at Camille. Her expression carried the particular warmth of someone whose empathy was strategic rather than genuine. "Folks, I'm sorry about the inconvenience." Her voice softened, the maternal register, the one designed to create a sense of safety that would lower defenses and encourage admissions. "My deputy's just doing his job. If you cooperate, we can get this sorted out quickly." "There is nothing to sort out." Camille's voice cut through the performance. "Your deputy planted a bag of marijuana in our trunk, seized my phone without a warrant, and arrested us without probable cause." Lockhart's warmth cooled by precisely 2 degrees. "Ma'am, I understand this is stressful, but making accusations against an officer during an active stop isn't going to help your situation. My situation is that I've been pulled from my car, handcuffed, and physically handled by a deputy who hasn't provided a single legitimate reason for this stop." "The bolo." "There is no bolo." Marcus spoke for the first time since Lockhart arrived. "I'd like the specific bolo number, the issuing agency, and the date of issuance. If it exists, it will be in the National Crime Information Center database and can be verified with a single query." Lockhart looked at him, a longer look than necessary, the kind of assessment that went beyond visual identification and into something more calculating, an evaluation of threat level, not physical but procedural. This man knew what an NCIC database was. This man was requesting information with the precision of someone who knew what the answers should be. "Sir, we'll address all of that during processing." She turned back to Gunnerson. "You searched the vehicle?" "Thoroughly." "Body cam?" "Running." Another lie, delivered with the same smooth automation. Lockhart didn't check, didn't ask to see the indicator light, didn't look at the camera at all. Either she knew it wasn't recording and didn't care, or she'd been part of enough stops to know that the question was theater and the answer was irrelevant. She keyed her shoulder mic. "Dispatch, Unit 12 on scene at the traffic stop on 231. Confirm the bolo reference for the vehicle." The radio hissed. Then Prater's voice. "Unit 12, Bolo 273 was issued Friday at 1400 by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Reference case number TBI 24-0942. Drug interdiction, Interstate 40 corridor, multiple dark-colored sedans reported. Smooth, detailed. Complete with a case number that sounded legitimate. Marcus noted it. TBI 240942. He'd verify it within the hour if given access to a phone. He already knew it was fabricated, but the verification would become evidence. "There's your bolo, sir." Lockhart's voice carried the gentle condescension of someone explaining arithmetic to a child. "Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you cooperate with processing. We sort out the marijuana charge and everyone goes home tonight. The hard way involves additional charges for obstruction and your wife gets processed separately." Processed separately. The words carried a specific threat: separation from each other, isolation, the removal of the one witness who could corroborate the truth of what had happened. Standard tactic. Divide, isolate, control the narrative. Marcus looked at Camille across the roof of the car. She looked back. 12 years of marriage communicated in a single glance. The shorthand that develops between people who've navigated crises together, who know each other's signals, who trust the plan even when the plan involves standing in handcuffs on a dark highway. She gave him the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, the signal that meant, "I'm okay, do what you need to do." "We'll cooperate with transport," Marcus said, under protest. "And I'm requesting that the following be documented: the time of the stop, the stated reason, the search, the alleged discovery, my assertion that the contraband was planted, the seizure of my wife's phone, and the fact that neither of us has been read Miranda warnings despite being placed in custody." Lockhart blinked. Once. The list was too specific, too organized, too procedurally aware for a civilian traffic stop. People who'd been pulled over and handcuffed didn't usually produce itemized documentation requests. They protested. They argued. They threatened to call lawyers. They didn't build case records in real time. But she recovered quickly. "We'll note your concerns. Wade, transport the male in your unit. I'll take the female in mine. Separation. As predicted. Asterisk, asterisk. If you think this couple is going down without a fight, you clearly haven't seen what's coming. Like this video right now, because the next 10 minutes will change everything. Asterisk, asterisk, narrator. The drive to the East Side Annex took 14 minutes. Marcus sat in the back of Gunnerson's patrol car, a cage of mesh partition and vinyl seats that smelled like sweat and fast food grease and something chemical that might have been pepper spray residue or might have been industrial cleaner. The handcuffs dug into his wrists with every bump in the road, the tight ratcheting sending periodic jolts of numbness through his fingers. Gunnerson drove without speaking. The radio chattered with routine dispatch traffic, a domestic disturbance in Smyrna, a fender bender on Interstate 24, a noise complaint in a Murfreesboro subdivision. The ordinary business of law enforcement proceeding normally while something profoundly abnormal happened in the backseat of Unit 7. Marcus used the silence to organize. Timestamps first, 9:07 p.m. for the initial stop, 9:12 for the order to exit the vehicle, 9:15 for the cuff application, 9:18 for the planted evidence discovery, 9:22 for the fabricated Bolo broadcast, 9:26 for Camille's arrest, 9:30 for Lockhart's arrival, each timestamp anchored to his watch, a Casio digital he wore specifically because its atomic clock synchronization provided courtroom admissible time accuracy. Then the verbal documentation. Speaking quietly, just above a whisper, he recited what he'd observed into the empty space of the patrol car's back seat. Saturday, March 8th, 9:37 p.m. I am being transported to East Side Annex by Deputy Wade Gunnerson, badge number not yet confirmed. My wife, Dr. Camille Adeyemi, is being transported separately by Sergeant Patty Lockhart. During the traffic stop at approximately mile marker 41 on Highway 231, Deputy Gunnerson planted approximately 2 grams of suspected marijuana in the trunk of our vehicle, a 2020 Honda Accord, Tennessee plate Bravo Kilo 479er. The contraband was introduced during a period when Deputy Gunnerson was unsupervised at the rear of the vehicle. His body camera was powered on but not recording at the time of the stop, the search, the arrest, or the transport. Gunnerson's eyes appeared in the rearview mirror. "You talking to yourself back there?" "Documenting the encounter, as is my right under the First Amendment." "Document away." The dismissal was total. A man who believed that words spoken in the back of a patrol car held no power. That documentation without audience was performance without consequence. He didn't know about the dash cam feed streaming to Memphis. He didn't know that Special Agent Rueda had already elevated the alert to ASAC Okafor. He didn't know that a tactical response team was being assembled 63 miles away, that federal warrants were being drafted based on the live video evidence of evidence planting and false arrest, that the machinery of federal law enforcement, the same machinery that Gunnerson's badge was supposed to serve, was turning its focus toward this patrol car with the slow, irrevocable momentum of a process that could not be stopped once initiated. He didn't know any of that, and that was exactly how Marcus needed it. Narrator. The East Side Annex squatted on a dead-end road 3 miles south of Murfreesboro, a single-story concrete block building that had been constructed in the 1970s as a county maintenance facility and converted to law enforcement use in the 90s when the main precinct ran out of holding space. It had the particular aesthetic of institutional neglect, chain-link perimeter fence with sagging sections, a parking lot more pothole than pavement, fluorescent lights visible through narrow windows that sat too high in the walls for anyone inside to see out. The building served as overflow booking and short-term detention. Fewer cameras than the main precinct, fewer staff, fewer eyes on what happened inside. The kind of facility that existed in the gaps between official oversight, where procedures that wouldn't survive scrutiny in a modern precinct could be conducted with the comfortable knowledge that no one was watching. Gunnerson parked in the rear lot and pulled Marcus from the back seat with a grip on his upper arm that was 2 degrees past professional and firmly into punitive. Marcus's feet hit the cracked asphalt, and Gunnerson steered him toward the building's rear entrance, a metal door with a keypad lock and a security camera that Marcus noted immediately. Camera positioned to cover the door itself, but not the parking lot. Blind spot from the fence line to the building's south wall. Deliberate architectural oversight or budget limitation. Either way, it meant that what happened between the patrol car and the door went unrecorded. Gunnerson knew this. Marcus could tell by the way his grip tightened once they passed beyond the camera's field of view, the hand on his arm shifting from escort to control the fingers digging into the muscle of his tricep with the focused pressure of someone who understood where nerves clustered and how much discomfort could be inflicted without leaving marks. "Watch your step." Gunnerson guided Marcus toward a raised concrete curb at the building's threshold. Guided was generous. He shoved Marcus's shoulder forward while simultaneously slowing his own pace, creating the exact physics required for Marcus to trip over the curb and slam into the metal doorframe. Marcus didn't trip. 14 years of physical training, 4 years of military service before that, the particular balance and spatial awareness that came from operating in hostile environments where falling down could mean not getting back up. He absorbed the shove, adjusted his center of gravity, cleared the curb, and hit the doorframe with his shoulder instead of his face. Gunnerson's expression flickered. Annoyance at the failed provocation, quickly masked. He punched the keypad code and pushed the door open. Inside, the annex smelled like industrial disinfectant and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights cast the same greenish tint that institutional lighting always produced, the color of bureaucracy, of waiting rooms, of places where time moved differently because the people inside had no control over when they'd leave. A booking desk sat against the far wall, manned by a deputy Marcus hadn't seen before. Young, maybe mid-20s, with the uncertain posture of someone still figuring out where they fit in the department's hierarchy. His nameplate read, "Colvin." "Got a booking." Gunnerson steered Marcus toward the desk. "Marijuana possession, obstruction, possible additional charges pending. Wife's coming in separate transport." Colvin looked at Marcus, looked at the handcuffs, looked back at Gunnerson with the particular expression of a junior officer who sensed something wrong but lacked the authority or the courage to question it. "Need the arrest report for booking?" "Writing it up now." Gunnerson sat Marcus in a metal chair bolted to the floor next to the booking desk. The chair was designed for discomfort. No back support, seat angled slightly forward to prevent slouching, positioned so that the person sitting faced the wall rather than the room. A seating arrangement designed to make you feel small, contained, forgotten. Marcus sat, adjusted his posture to minimize the pressure on his wrists, and waited. 3 minutes later, the front entrance opened and Lockhart walked Camille inside. She was intact. No visible injuries, no torn clothing, the same navy dress now wrinkled from the patrol car's vinyl seat, but otherwise undamaged. But her eyes carried something they hadn't carried when Marcus last saw her. A tightly controlled fury that he recognized from 12 years of marriage, from arguments and crises, and the moments when Camille's professional calm gave way to the raw intensity underneath. Something had happened during the transport. Something Lockhart had said or done in the privacy of the SUV's interior, beyond cameras and witnesses, that had shifted Camille from cooperative detainee to something more dangerous. A woman with a surgeon's precision and a sergeant's daughter's understanding of exactly how much misconduct she'd just experienced. Their eyes met across the booking area. Marcus raised his eyebrows slightly. The question. Camille gave him a single sharp shake of her head. The answer. Not now. Later, when we're alone. When it's safe. Lockhart positioned Camille in a second metal chair, 3 feet from Marcus, but angled so they couldn't easily see each other's faces. Divide, isolate, control. "Process them both," Lockhart told Colvin. "Standard booking? I'll start the paperwork." Colvin approached Marcus first. Fingerprints, the ink pad and the rolling pressure, firm but not punitive, the touch of a man following a procedure he'd been taught, rather than a man enjoying the exercise of power. Then the booking photo, front-facing side profile. Name? Marcus Adeyemi, Adeyemi. Colvin typed. Date of birth? July 14th, 1984. Address? Marcus provided the address of the cover residence he maintained in Murfreesboro, a 1-bedroom apartment leased through a bureau front company, used for exactly these situations. His actual home was in Memphis, but that information didn't belong in a county booking system. Occupation? Marcus paused. 1 beat. The pause was tactical, long enough to create the appearance of someone deciding what to say, short enough to avoid suspicion. Consultant. Colvin typed it without follow-up. Didn't ask what kind of consultant. Didn't probe. A junior deputy processing a Saturday night booking, moving through the checklist with the mechanical efficiency of someone who wanted his shift to end. When Colvin moved to Camille, the process repeated. Name, date of birth, address. She provided the same cover address. When he asked for occupation, she said physician without hesitation. Physician, Gunnerson's voice carried from across the room, where he was hunched over a desk writing the arrest report. She said she was a surgeon earlier. Which one is it? A surgeon is a physician. Camille's voice was ice. It's a specialization within the field of medicine, the way corruption is a specialization within law enforcement. Silence. The kind that fills a room the way water fills a glass, all at once, leaving no air. Gunnerson's pen stopped moving. Lockhart looked up from her phone. Even Colvin, who had been maintaining a careful neutrality throughout the booking, froze mid-keystroke. "What did you say?" Gunnerson stood. The chair scraped against the linoleum, a sound that cut through the silence like a blade. Marcus spoke before Camille could respond. "My wife is exhausted from a 12-hour surgical shift and is understandably frustrated by the circumstances. She'd like to exercise her right to remain silent going forward." "She'd like to exercise her right." Gunnerson took 3 steps toward Camille's chair. His shadow fell across her. A deliberate positioning, the physical manifestation of authority, using proximity as pressure. "Your wife's got a real mouth on her for someone in handcuffs." "Deputy." Lockhart's voice carried the weight of rank. "Step back." Gunnerson didn't step back immediately. He held the position for 3 seconds, 3 seconds of looming, of shadow casting, of silent threat, before turning away with the controlled reluctance of a dog being pulled off a bone. Lockhart approached Camille, knelt beside her chair. The maternal register returned, softer now, more intimate, the voice of a woman who wanted to be seen as an ally. "Ma'am, I know this is difficult. Can I get you some water? The restroom?" Camille looked at Lockhart with an expression that could have cut diamond. "You can get me my phone call. Georgia code notwithstanding. Tennessee code annotated, section 40-7-106, provides for reasonable access to communication upon arrest. I've been in custody for," she glanced at the wall clock, "38 minutes without access to a phone." Lockhart's kneeling posture didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. The second time tonight that a procedural citation had landed with unexpected weight. The second time one of these 2 people had demonstrated legal knowledge that didn't match the profile of a random Saturday night drug bust. "We'll get to that during processing." She stood, patted Camille's shoulder, a gesture so condescending that Marcus felt it from 3 feet away. "Just sit tight." Narrator. The phone call didn't come for another 47 minutes. By then, the booking was complete, the arrest report had been filed, and Marcus and Camille had been placed in separate holding cells at opposite ends of a short corridor, close enough to hear each other's voices if they shouted, too far apart for normal conversation. Marcus's cell measured approximately 8 by 10 feet. Concrete block walls painted institutional gray. A metal bench bolted to one wall. A stainless steel toilet with no privacy screen. Overhead fluorescent light that buzzed at a frequency designed to prevent sleep. No clock, no window. A security camera in the upper corner that may or may not have been functional. The indicator light was off, but that could mean either inoperative or covert. He sat on the bench, adjusted his position to accommodate the handcuffs, which had not been removed despite booking being complete. Standard protocol required removal of restraints once a detainee was secured in a holding cell. Another violation. Another data point. The credential case remained in his jacket. Nobody had searched him. Not a pat-down, not a property inventory, nothing beyond the handcuffs applied at the roadside. Gunnerson had been so focused on the vehicle search and the planted evidence that he'd neglected the fundamental procedure of searching the person he'd arrested. The gold badge sat against Marcus's ribs. 5 ounces of metal that represented the full weight and authority of the federal government. 5 ounces that could end this with a single presentation and a phone call. 5 ounces that he was deliberately not using, because using them now would save him and Camille from a bad night, but would cost 6 months of investigation and the justice that 347 other black and brown drivers deserved. So the badge stayed in the pocket, and Marcus sat on the bench, and he waited. At 10:29 p.m., Colvin appeared at the cell door with a cordless phone. 1 call, 5 minutes. Marcus took the phone, dialed from memory, not the Memphis field office main line, which would be answered by the switchboard operator and routed through standard channels, but the direct desk number for ASAC Denise Okafor, who would be waiting for exactly this call. The phone rang once, twice. "Okafor. This is consultant." The code designation for his cover identity during HIGHLINE operations. "I'm at the East Side Annex. My wife is here as well. We're both in custody. Charges are marijuana possession and obstruction. The contraband was planted. The bolo is fabricated. Deputy's body cam was inactive during the encounter." A pause. 3 seconds. Okafor processing the information. Not because she hadn't been monitoring the dashcam feed, but because the verbal confirmation established a formal evidentiary record that the live stream alone could not provide. "Understood. Status? Physically intact. Cuffs are tight. No Miranda administered before custodial interrogation by Sergeant Lockhart during transport. My wife was subjected to physical handling during extraction from the vehicle and during transport. Details forthcoming when secure. Copy. Timeline? They'll hold us for weekend processing. Bail hearing Monday at earliest. I need the team here before they discover what's in my jacket. Another pause. Longer. The calculation of a senior federal official weighing tactical options against procedural constraints. Rushing a response risked tipping the county that the FBI was involved before the warrants were ready. Waiting risked Gunnerson or someone else finding the credential case during a proper search and destroying the cover that made the entire investigation viable. 90 minutes. Can you hold? I'll hold. Stay on cover. Don't reveal. We come to you. The line disconnected. Marcus held the phone for another 2 seconds, appearing to anyone watching like a man absorbing the end of an unsatisfying conversation. Then he handed the phone back to Colvin through the cell door's pass-through slot. Thank you. Colvin nodded. Didn't ask who he'd called. Didn't ask what consultant meant. Just took the phone and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor with the hollow sound of a man who was beginning to suspect that the people in these cells were not who his sergeant said they were. Narrator. At 10:41 p.m., a gray Dodge Charger with no license plates pulled into the annex parking lot and parked in the blind spot between the perimeter fence and the building's south wall, the same blind spot Marcus had identified during his entry. The car sat with its engine running for 4 minutes. No interior lights, no movement visible through the tinted windows. Then the driver's door opened and Kira Tanaka stepped out. 24 years old, 5'9", 155 pounds, distributed with the lean efficiency of someone who'd been trained to use every ounce for maximum effect. Japanese-American. Black jacket over a dark shirt, tactical boots that didn't match civilian footwear, pants with cargo pockets positioned for equipment access rather than fashion. He moved from the car to the building's rear entrance with a gait that Marcus would have recognized immediately. Military trained, weight balanced on the balls of the feet, shoulders level, head tracking on a swivel pattern that covered entry points and sight lines without the exaggerated head movements of someone who'd learned from movies. Infantry gait. The specific locomotion of someone who'd been trained at a place like Fort Campbell and had spent enough time in the field for the training to become permanent. He punched the keypad code, the same code Gunnerson had used, and entered without knocking, without announcing, without the hesitation of someone who didn't belong. Inside, Lockhart looked up from the booking desk. Her expression didn't register surprise. It registered recognition. He's in cell 2. She's in cell 4. Tanaka nodded. Didn't speak. His eyes swept the room. Colvin at the desk, Gunnerson in the break area, the corridor leading to the holding cells, assessing, cataloging. The room scan of someone whose baseline assumption was that every environment contained threats. He walked toward the corridor. Colvin watched him pass, confusion visible, the junior deputy's instinct that something was wrong competing with his institutional training to defer to people who walked with authority. Hey, who are you? Colvin's hand moved toward his radio. Not a conscious decision, but the muscle memory of a man trained to report unknown individuals in secure areas. Transport. Tanaka's voice was flat, toneless. The single word delivered as though further explanation was beneath him. Transport to where? I don't have a transfer order. Lockhart intervened. It's handled, Colvin. Sheriff's office arranged special transport. Go take your break. Colvin looked at Lockhart, looked at Tanaka, looked at the corridor where 2 people sat in holding cells who'd been arrested on charges that didn't quite add up, processed by a deputy whose body cam wasn't recording, and were now apparently being transferred by a man with no badge, no nameplate, and no identifying credentials. His hand stayed near his radio. 3 seconds of decision. Then it dropped to his side. Yes, ma'am. He walked toward the break room. The decision that would keep him awake for months afterward, replaying those 3 seconds, wondering what would have happened if he'd keyed the mic instead of following the order. Narrator. Marcus heard the footsteps before he saw the man. 2 sets, one heavy and familiar, Gunnerson. One lighter and precise, unknown. The lighter footsteps carried a rhythm he recognized instinctively, a cadence that existed in his own muscle memory from years of military service. The cell door opened. Gunnerson stood in the frame, backlit by the corridor's fluorescence. Behind him, Tanaka, visible for the first time, face impassive, eyes performing the same room scan that Marcus had noted during his own entry. Get up. Gunnerson gestured toward the corridor. Change of plans. You're being transferred. Transferred where? County facility south of town. Annex doesn't have weekend staffing for extended holds. Marcus looked past Gunnerson at Tanaka, studied the face, young, mid-20s, Asian descent, the black jacket, the tactical boots. The way he stood with his weight forward, hands at his sides but positioned for quick deployment. The outline beneath the left side of his jacket, a shape Marcus recognized immediately. Concealed firearm, holstered but present. His mind processed. No badge, no nameplate, no law enforcement insignia, no radio, no handcuffs on his belt. The universal tool of anyone who transports prisoners. And a concealed weapon that, based on the outline, appeared to be a compact semi-automatic carried without a visible retention holster. This was not a deputy. This was not a corrections officer. This was not anyone authorized to transport a prisoner under Tennessee law. This was something else entirely. "I'd like to see your identification," Marcus addressed Tanaka directly. "And the transfer authorization paperwork signed by a duty supervisor." Tanaka said nothing. His expression didn't change. The absence of response was its own answer. People with legitimate authority identified themselves when asked. People without legitimate authority stayed silent and waited for someone with a badge to do the talking for them. Gunnerson stepped into the cell. "You don't get to make demands. Stand up and walk, or I walk you." Under Tennessee Code Annotated, Section 40-7-120, prisoner transport requires authorization from the booking supervisor and documentation of the receiving facility. I'm requesting to see that documentation. Gunnerson's hand closed around Marcus's upper arm. The same grip from the parking lot, fingers targeting the nerve cluster, pressure designed to produce compliance through pain. He pulled Marcus to his feet. "Walk." Marcus walked. Not because the legal argument had failed, but because resistance at this point, physical resistance against a badge-carrying deputy in the man's own facility, would produce injuries, additional charges, and a use of force narrative that would obscure the actual crimes being committed. He walked past Tanaka in the corridor, close enough to confirm the concealed weapon outline. Compact frame, likely a Glock 19 or similar. Close enough to smell the faint scent of gun oil that came from regular maintenance of a carried weapon. Close enough to see, at the inside edge of Tanaka's collar, the edge of a tattoo. Dark ink, geometric, the kind of military unit marking that soldiers got at duty stations. Close enough to identify the boots. Belleville 590S, hot weather combat boots. Standard U.S. Army infantry issue. The same boots Marcus had worn during his first deployment. Marcus cataloged everything, filed it in the same mental structure he'd been building all night. The man without a badge, the gun without a holster, the military boots on civilian feet, the tattoo at the collar line, the Dodge Charger with no plates in the parking lot blind spot. Whoever this person was, he'd been called, not dispatched, called, by someone inside this building for a purpose that required arriving after booking, but before morning, in a vehicle that couldn't be traced, with a weapon that shouldn't have been present. Marcus had seen this pattern before, in the case files, in the witness statements, in the 3 incidents where complainants against Rutherford County deputies had abruptly recanted their statements after receiving late-night visits from an unnamed individual described as young, quiet, military-looking. The pattern had a name in the HIGHLINE file. Unknown Subject 7, referenced in supplemental reports as possible enforcement asset deployed for witness intimidation. Marcus's team had been trying to identify Unsub 7 for 4 months. And now Unsub 7 was standing 3 feet away, escorting him down a corridor in a building where no one was going to stop whatever happened next, except that someone was watching, someone in Memphis, behind a screen, monitoring a feed that neither Gunnerson nor Lockhart nor Tanaka knew existed. Someone who had heard Marcus's phone call 40 minutes ago and was now, at this very moment, activating the response protocol that would bring 3 black SUVs and 8 federal agents down Highway 231 at speeds that rural Tennessee had never seen. 90 minutes, Okafor had said. 40 had passed. 50 to go. Narrator. They brought Camille out of her cell next. She emerged into the corridor with the rigid posture of a woman maintaining composure through force of will, shoulders back, chin level, eyes forward. But Marcus saw the details she couldn't hide. The slight tremor in her left hand, the redness around her right wrist where the cuff had been tightened during transport, the way she held her right arm slightly closer to her body than her left, as though protecting a sore point along the inside of her forearm. Something had happened during the ride with Lockhart. Something physical, something beyond the standard indignity of being a black woman in handcuffs in the back of a patrol car. He caught her eye. She gave him the same sharp headshake. Not now. The message was clear, and he honored it, but the observation filed itself alongside every other violation in the growing catalog of this night. Gunnerson walked them both toward the rear exit. Tanaka followed 3 paces behind, close enough to respond, far enough to maintain a clear line of sight on both of them. A formation that Marcus recognized as escort protocol. Not law enforcement escort protocol, Military escort protocol. The specific spacing and positioning taught in prisoner handling courses at Army installations. The rear door opened onto the dark parking lot. The air was cold. March in Tennessee, the particular chill that settled after sundown when the day's warmth evaporated and the wind came down from the hills with nothing to stop it. Camille shivered. The Navy dress was not built for outdoor exposure at 40 degrees. The gray Dodge Charger sat in the blind spot, engine still running, headlights off. Get in the back. Gunnerson opened the rear door. Marcus looked at the Charger, looked at Tanaka, looked at the building behind them, where Colvin had been sent on break and Lockhart remained inside, maintaining the plausible deniability that came from not being present when the transfer occurred. I'm not getting in that vehicle. Marcus's voice was steady, but carried an edge it hadn't carried before. The first deviation from pure compliance, the first indication that a line existed, and they were approaching it. That is not a county vehicle. There is no transport authorization. And this individual, he looked directly at Tanaka, is not a law enforcement officer. Gunnerson's response was physical. He grabbed Marcus by both shoulders and drove him backward into the Charger's rear quarter panel. The impact compressed the air from Marcus's lungs. His cuffed hands caught the edge of the door frame. Pain shot through both wrists as the metal handcuffs ground against the bone. I gave you an order. Gunnerson's face was inches away, the wintergreen breath hot against Marcus's skin. You are a prisoner in my custody. You get in whatever vehicle I tell you to get in. Do you understand me? Marcus breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The pain management technique taught in SEER training. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. The program he'd completed at Fort Bragg in 2008 as a requirement for his Army intelligence assignment. The technique designed to maintain cognitive function during physical duress. I understand that you're assaulting a restrained person. His voice was controlled. I understand that this is the third use of force tonight. The ankle kick during the initial stop, the back slam against my vehicle, and now this. And I understand that the man standing behind you has a concealed firearm under his jacket and no law enforcement credentials. I'd like all of this noted for whatever recording systems are active in this facility. Gunnerson leaned harder. The pressure against Marcus's chest compressed his breathing further. The handcuff chain dug into the small of his back. Nobody's recording anything, and nobody's going to hear you. The cruelest truths were the ones spoken with total confidence. Gunnerson believed it. Believed that the cameras were off, the witnesses were elsewhere, and the night would end with his version of events etched into the official record and nothing else. He was wrong about all of it. But Marcus couldn't tell him that. Not yet. Not for another 38 minutes. Leave him alone. Camille's voice cut across the parking lot like a scalpel. She was standing 4 feet away, cuffed, unarmed, physically outmatched by every metric. And yet her voice carried an authority that made Gunnerson's head turn. Put us in the vehicle if that's what you're going to do, but take your hands off him. The authority in her voice wasn't performance. It was inheritance. The daughter of Sergeant Raymond Laurent, NYPD retired, a man who'd spent 31 years walking Brooklyn's most difficult beats and had raised his daughter to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to speak anyway. Gunnerson released Marcus, stepped back. The decision wasn't born of respect. It was tactical. He'd made his point. The physical hierarchy was established. Continuing would produce injuries that might require documentation, and Lockhart's careful absence from the parking lot suggested that documentation was something everyone wanted to avoid tonight. Get in, both of you. He jerked his thumb toward the Charger's open rear door. Marcus looked at Camille. She looked back. The communication was instantaneous. They got in. Tanaka closed the door behind them. Walked around to the driver's seat. The engine idled, low and steady, the sound of a powerful motor being held in check. Gunnerson tapped the roof twice, the universal signal, go. The Charger pulled out of the parking lot, no headlights. The car moved through the dark like a predator navigating territory it knew by feel, turning left onto the access road, then right onto a county route that Marcus recognized as heading south, away from Murfreesboro, away from the main precinct, away from any facility that appeared in the Rutherford County Corrections Directory. Marcus noted the direction, noted the turns, noted the mile markers visible in the ambient light from distant farm properties. Building a map in his mind the way he'd built maps in Kandahar, the way he'd built maps in every operational environment since. Landmarks, distances, terrain features, escape routes. Beside him, Camille leaned close enough that her lips were inches from his ear. Her whisper was barely audible above the engine noise. She hit me. In the car, open hand across the face when I asked for my phone call. Said it was a lesson in respect. Marcus's jaw tightened. The information slotted into the catalog. Assault on a restrained person by a law enforcement officer during transport. Add it to the list. Add it to the case file that was growing thicker by the minute. "The Memphis team has live feed," he whispered back. "Stay calm, 32 minutes. A number. A countdown." The only reassurance he could offer in the back of an unregistered vehicle, driven by an armed man who was not a police officer, heading to a destination that no one had named. Camille found his hand behind their backs. Their cuffed fingers intertwined. Awkward, metal on metal, the opposite of every tender gesture they'd shared in 12 years of marriage. But the pressure of her fingers against his carried everything that words couldn't. "I trust you." Narrator. The Charger turned onto an unpaved road at 10:58 p.m. The vehicle bounced over ruts and washboard surfaces, the suspension absorbing impacts that rattled Marcus's teeth and sent jolts through his handcuffed wrists. Trees closed in on both sides, the kind of dense, unmanaged growth that meant they'd left developed land behind and were heading into the agricultural or forest areas that made up the southern third of Rutherford's county. The road ended at a gate, chain link topped with razor wire, surrounding a property that Marcus could barely see in the Charger's running lights. A low structure, possibly a barn or equipment shed, with a gravel clearing in front and no visible lighting. Tanaka stopped the car, left the engine running, got out without a word and walked to the gate, producing a key from his jacket pocket. The key. Not a combination lock, not a keypad. A physical key carried on his person for a gate on a remote property in the middle of Rutherford County. The kind of access that came from ownership or regular use, not from a one-time transport assignment. Marcus filed it. Property access, key possession, familiarity with the route. This was not Tanaka's first time here. This was infrastructure, a location maintained for a purpose, equipped for a function, and known to the people who used it. The gate swung open. Tanaka returned to the car and drove through, parked in the gravel clearing, killed the engine. Silence. The total pressing silence of rural darkness. No traffic, no distant sirens, no ambient noise except the cooling engine's ticking and the faint sound of wind through bare branches. Tanaka opened the rear door. Out. Marcus and Camille stepped into the cold. The gravel crunched underfoot. The air smelled like hay and diesel and the particular mustiness of an old agricultural building. Marcus looked at the structure. Single story. Metal roof, roll-up door on one end, standard door on the other. No windows, no signage. No indication of ownership or purpose. He looked at Tanaka. The young man stood beside the car with his hands at his sides, the jacket shifted just enough to expose the grip of the concealed firearm. His face was unreadable. Not hostile, not anxious, not anything. The face of someone who disconnected emotion from action the way soldiers learned to do when the action required things that emotion would prevent. "What is this place?" Camille's voice was sharp. The surgeon's directness, demanding information with the same urgency she'd demand a patient's blood type in an emergency. "Holding." Tanaka's single-word answer carried no inflection. "Holding for what?" No response. He walked toward the building's standard door, pulling another key. Opened it. Reached inside and flipped a switch. A single bulb came on inside, casting a cone of yellow light that spilled onto the gravel. Inside, Marcus assessed the situation. Isolated location. Armed escort with no badge. A building that wasn't in any corrections database. No cameras, no oversight, no record of their presence. Every element of the scenario designed to place them beyond the reach of the systems that were supposed to protect them. Or, if you viewed it from the other direction, every element designed to ensure that whatever happened next would happen without witnesses. He had 24 minutes until Okafor's team arrived at the annex, but the annex was 14 miles behind them now, and the team wouldn't know they'd been moved, unless the dash cam had caught it. Marcus rewound the night in his mind. The dash cam was mounted in the Honda Accord, which was still parked on Highway 231's shoulder, or possibly towed by now to the county impound lot. The camera had recorded everything at the roadside stop, but once they were placed in separate patrol cars, the dash cam lost visual contact. It had no audio from inside the patrol cars, no video from the annex, no way to track their location after the initial arrest. Ruda and Okafor knew they were at the annex. Marcus had confirmed that during his phone call, but they didn't know about the transfer, didn't know about Tanaka, didn't know about the Charger, or the unpaved road, or the building with no windows. The team would arrive at the annex, find the cells empty, find Colvin on his break and Lockhart maintaining ignorance, and then the search would begin. But the search would take time, and time was the one thing Marcus wasn't sure he had. He made a decision. "I need to use the restroom." He said it to Tanaka, loudly enough to be heard from 30 feet away. Routine request. The kind of thing any prisoner would ask. But the request carried a secondary purpose. It would get him inside the building, into a space where he could assess exits, obstacles, and the layout that might determine whether the next 20 minutes ended in intervention or catastrophe. Tanaka looked at him. 3 seconds of assessment. Then he nodded toward the open door. Marcus walked inside. Camille followed. The building's interior confirmed his external assessment. A converted equipment shed, roughly 30 by 40 feet. Concrete floor stained with oil and grease from decades of agricultural machinery. A partition wall dividing the space into 2 sections. The front section contained a metal table, 2 chairs, and a portable heater that glowed red in the corner. The back section was hidden behind the partition, visible only through a doorless opening. No restroom, no plumbing fixtures, no amenities of any kind. This was not a holding facility. This was a room in the middle of nowhere, equipped with a table and chairs and nothing else. The kind of room where conversations happened that couldn't happen in places with cameras. Asterisk, asterisk. If your heart is pounding right now, imagine being handcuffed in this room with no way out. Like and subscribe, because you will not believe who's about to walk through that door. Asterisk, asterisk, narrator. At 11:04 p.m., headlights swept across the building's metal wall. A vehicle approaching on the unpaved road. Then a second set of headlights. 2 vehicles. Tanaka stood near the door, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly. Feet wider, weight lower, the micro-adjustments of someone whose training activated automatically when conditions changed. He stepped outside. Marcus heard voices, low, brief, the kind of exchange between people who didn't need many words because the plan had already been discussed. The door opened. Deputy Ellis Fry entered first. 29, wiry, sharp-featured, wearing the expression of someone who considered himself the smartest person in any room. He carried a laptop bag over one shoulder and a department-issue body cam in his hand, not mounted on his chest, but carried like a prop, available for deployment if documentation became strategically useful. Behind him, Sheriff Roy Blanton, 61 years old, 3 terms elected, a face that belonged on campaign posters, square-jawed, silver-haired, the photogenic durability of a man who'd mastered the art of looking authoritative without actually being competent. He wore civilian clothes, khakis, a plaid shirt, a department windbreaker that he'd probably grabbed on the way out the door. The windbreaker said sheriff in reflective letters across the back, but the man wearing it looked like he'd been pulled from Saturday night dinner, not from any operational command post. Blanton surveyed the room. Marcus and Camille in chairs, handcuffed. Tanaka at the door. Fry setting up the laptop on the metal table. The portable heater throwing red light across the concrete floor. These them? Blanton's first words, directed at nobody in particular. Yes, sir. Fry opened the laptop. Marcus and Camille Adeyemi. He's 41. Lists his occupation as consultant. She's a physician at Vanderbilt. Gunnerson found 2 grams of marijuana in the trunk. Blanton looked at Marcus. The kind of look that began at the face and traveled downward, not checking for weapons or contraband, but evaluating, sizing up. The assessment of a man who'd spent 3 decades deciding which people mattered and which didn't, and who'd built an entire political career on the certainty that his assessment was always correct. A consultant. Blanton dragged the word out. What kind of consultant? The kind that doesn't discuss clients during illegal detentions. Marcus's response was measured, but the directness of it, the refusal to perform deference in a room full of people who expected it, landed like a stone in still water. Blanton's mouth tightened. He pulled a chair from the table, positioned it directly in front of Marcus, and sat down, close, knees almost touching. The interrogation posture of a man who believed that physical proximity was a substitute for probable cause. Let me tell you how this works. Blanton's voice was low, conversational, carrying the particular confidence of someone who'd never been challenged by anyone who could actually hurt him. My deputy found drugs in your car. That's a crime. You resisted during the stop. That's a crime. Your wife interfered with the arrest. That's a crime. 3 crimes, 2 suspects, 1 night. Simple math. He leaned forward. Now, we can process this through the system. Charges filed Monday. Bail hearing, attorney fees, your name in the paper. Her hospital notified that one of their surgeons got popped for possession on a Saturday night. Professional board review. Licensing implications. The whole machine. He let the words settle. The threat architecture was elegant, not brute force, but bureaucratic destruction. The threat of the system being used as a weapon, turning the machinery of justice into a punishment that preceded any verdict. Or, Blanton continued, we can have a conversation. Right here, right now. You tell me what a consultant and a surgeon are doing driving Highway 231 every Saturday night for the last 6 months, and maybe we find a way to make this whole thing disappear." The room temperature dropped. Not physically, the heater still glowed red in the corner, but the air changed. The question changed everything. Every Saturday night for the last 6 months. Blanton knew. Not about the FBI investigation. If he'd known about that, he wouldn't be sitting in a chair having a conversation. He'd be on the phone with a lawyer and the county commission. But he knew about the drives. He knew about the pattern. He'd noticed, or been told by someone who'd noticed, that a black couple in a Honda Accord had been driving through his jurisdiction on a regular schedule, and that regularity had triggered the particular paranoia of a man with things to hide. Marcus recalibrated. The stop tonight wasn't random. It wasn't Gunnerson freelancing on a Saturday shift. It was targeted, directed. The culmination of observation that had been running parallel to Marcus's own investigation, the subject watching the investigator without knowing it, was an investigation, sensing the surveillance without understanding its source, which meant the planted evidence, the fabricated bolo, the arrest, the transfer to this building. None of it was standard procedure for a traffic stop. All of it was an interrogation. The entire night had been engineered to get Marcus into this chair, in front of this man, for this conversation. The case file in Memphis was going to need a new chapter. "I drive Highway 231 because it's a scenic route." Marcus's voice betrayed nothing. "My wife and I enjoy weekend drives." Blanton smiled. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, that existed solely to communicate disbelief without the rudeness of an accusation. "Scenic route, at 9 o'clock at night, on a 2-lane highway with no streetlights and nothing to see." He looked at Camille. "Doctor, does your husband always take you on scenic drives through the dark?" "My husband's recreational choices are not relevant to the fabricated charges your deputy filed tonight." Camille's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. "What's relevant is that we've been transported to an unregistered location by an armed civilian with no law enforcement credentials, and you, an elected official, are conducting an interrogation without Miranda warnings, without legal counsel present, and without any documentation of where we are." Blanton's smile faded. The specific sequential listing of violations, delivered not with the hysteria of a frightened detainee, but with the clinical precision of someone who knew exactly which federal statutes were being broken and in what order, produced the same reaction it had produced in Lockhart and Gunnerson, a brief visible recalibration of assumptions. "You seem to know a lot about procedure, Doctor." Blanton's voice carried a new note. Not warmth, calculation. Almost like you've been through this before." "I'm married to a consultant." Camille's response carried an entire architecture of meaning underneath its surface simplicity. Fry, at the table, had been typing on the laptop throughout the exchange. He looked up. "Sheriff, I'm running their names through extended databases. His background's clean. No priors, no warrants. Hers too. Vanderbilt employment confirmed." "What about the vehicle? Registration history," Fry typed. Waited. "Registered to Marcus Adeyemi at a Murfreesboro address. Bought cash, no lien. Clean title." More typing. "No flags in NCIC, no wants, no warrants." Blanton's jaw worked. The profile didn't fit. Drug couriers didn't buy vehicles with clean titles under their real names. They didn't list real addresses. They didn't marry surgeons at Vanderbilt. And they certainly didn't cite Miranda requirements and federal transport statutes while sitting in handcuffs. "Run him deeper." Blanton's voice was quiet. "Federal databases. See if there's anything that doesn't show up on the standard screen." Fry hesitated. "Sheriff, I'd need to use the CGIS terminal at the main precinct for federal access. We don't have that here." "Then call dispatch and have them run it." Fry picked up his phone, dialed, waited, and somewhere in that moment, between the phone call being placed and the answer coming back, the balance of the night shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but with the slow tectonic certainty of a process that, once started, could not be reversed, because the federal databases that Fry was about to query were monitored. Every search on every name flagged by an active federal investigation triggered an automated alert to the investigating agency. Marcus Adeyemi's name was not just in the federal system. His name was the federal system, the source credentials of the HIGHLINE investigation itself. The moment Prater ran that query, the Memphis field office would know that the local sheriff's department was searching their undercover agent, and that alert would tell Okafor something the dash cam couldn't, that the situation had escalated beyond a traffic stop into something that required immediate intervention, regardless of warrant status, regardless of tactical timing, regardless of the careful, patient 6-month timeline that had been at the investigation's operating principle. Marcus sat in his chair, hands cuffed, ribs aching from the impact against the charger, wrists numb from the over-tightened restraints. His wife beside him, bruised, slapped, extracted from the car by force, an armed man at the door, a sheriff across the table who'd built a system of racial profiling, evidence planting, and witness intimidation and was now, without knowing it, conducting the interrogation that would become the centerpiece of his own federal prosecution. 15 minutes until Okafor's team reached the annex, an unknown number of additional minutes until they traced the transfer. Every second between now and then was a second Marcus had to survive on cover, on composure, and on the absolute certainty that the system he'd spent 6 months building was about to do exactly what he'd built it to do. The badge in his jacket pressed against his ribs. 5 ounces. The weight of a promise. The weight of 347 traffic stops. The weight of justice delayed, documented, and about to be delivered. Not yet, but soon. Narrator. Then the phone rang. Fry answered, listened. His face changed, the animation draining from it the way color drains from skin when blood retreats to protect the core. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Sheriff? His voice was different, higher, the pitch of alarm. We have a problem. Blanton turned. What? Fry lowered the phone. His hand was shaking. A small tremor, barely visible, but present. The physiological response to information that rewrites reality. Dispatch ran his name through the federal database, and the query was flagged, immediately. She says the FBI field office in Memphis called back within 90 seconds. They asked for your name, your badge number, and the location of the detainee. The room went silent. They know where we are? Fry shook his head. They know we searched him. They know he's in our custody, and they want him located. Now. Blanton stood. The chair scraped backward. He looked at Marcus. A different look now. The assessment of a man who was recalculating everything he'd assumed in the last 4 hours. The consultant, the Saturday night drives, the wife who cited a federal law, the man who didn't flinch when a deputy slammed him into a car. Who are you? The question carried genuine confusion. The sound of a man whose certainty was fracturing. Marcus looked at him, held the gaze, held it for 5 seconds. 6, 7. You're about to find out. And at that precise moment, 11:21 p.m., March 8th, the distant sound of engines became audible through the building's metal walls. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, growing louder with the inexorable approach of something that could not be outrun, could not be negotiated with, and could not be stopped. The cavalry was early. Narrator. The first vehicle cleared the tree line at 11:22 p.m., headlights cutting through the darkness like surgical instruments, high beams locked on the building's metal facade. Then a second, then a third. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans in formation, spaced 40 feet apart, moving down the unpaved road with the disciplined speed of vehicles, driven by people who had practiced this exact approach on terrain just like it. Tanaka moved first. His hand went to his waistband, not drawing, but confirming the weapon's position, the reflexive check of someone whose training activated before conscious thought could intervene. His eyes swept the tree line, the gate he had left open behind them, the gravel clearing that was now flooded with approaching light. Who did you call? Blanton was on his feet, the chair knocked sideways, his voice cracking on the last word. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his jacket, pulling him upward with a violence that had nothing strategic about it. Pure panic, the kind that made men forget they were being watched. Marcus did not answer. The answer was pulling into the gravel clearing at that exact moment, doors opening before the vehicles had fully stopped, boots hitting ground with the synchronized precision of a team that had rehearsed this entry dozens of times. Fry slammed the laptop closed. His hands were shaking badly enough that the latch missed twice. He looked at Blanton, looked at the door, looked at Tanaka, searching for someone who had a plan, someone who could make this not be what it obviously was. Nobody had a plan. The standard door opened with the particular authority of someone who knew that locked doors were irrelevant when you carried the legal power to walk through them. 2 figures entered first, weapons drawn but lowered to the ready position. Not aimed at anyone, but present, visible, the universal language of federal force projection. Behind them, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Denise Okafor, stepped into the cone of yellow light. 53 years old, 5'6", 135 pounds. None of those numbers mattered. What mattered was the way she occupied the room, the particular authority of a woman who had spent 27 years with the Bureau and had learned that presence was more effective than size, that voice was more effective than volume, and that a federal warrant was more effective than anything. She wore a Navy windbreaker with FBI printed in gold letters across the chest. Her credentials hung from a lanyard around her neck, the gold badge catching the overhead bulb's light, the laminated photo ID swinging slightly as she moved. Behind her, 5 more agents fanned out through the space, 2 toward Tanaka, 2 toward the rear partition, 1 positioning at the door to control the exit. Okafor's eyes found Marcus. A single beat of visual assessment, confirming identity, checking for injuries, reading the situation in the shorthand that senior agents developed over decades of fieldwork. Then her gaze moved to Blanton, who still had his hand on Marcus's collar. "Remove your hand from my agent." Her voice carried no emotion, no heat, no anger, just instruction, delivered with the certainty of someone who understood that the words themselves carried all the force required. Blanton's hand opened. His fingers released the jacket fabric one by one, the way a man releases something he has only just realized is dangerous. He stepped backward. 1 step. 2. "Your agent." The words came out hollow. Okafor ignored him. She walked to Marcus, produced a handcuff key, and unlocked his restraints. The metal fell away from his wrists, the sudden absence of pressure almost more painful than the pressure itself as blood rushed back into compressed tissue. Deep red indentations circled both wrists, the skin already bruising where the ratchet teeth had bitten hardest. She moved to Camille. Same key, same deliberate removal. Camille's wrists were worse, the right one swollen at the base of the palm, the skin abraded where the cuff edge had ground during the patrol car transport. She flexed her fingers experimentally, the surgeon's instinctive self-assessment, checking the range of motion and nerve response the way she would check a patient's vitals. "Dr. Adeyemi," Okafor addressed her formally. "Are you injured?" "Contusions on both wrists, possible sprain on the right, bruising on my forearm from extraction at the vehicle, and I was struck across the face during transport by Sergeant Patty Lockhart." Camille delivered the inventory with clinical precision, not the voice of a victim, but the voice of a professional documenting findings. Okafor nodded, turned to the agent positioned at the door. "Get Dr. Adeyemi medical attention. Photograph all injuries before treatment. Chain of custody on the documentation starts now." The agent stepped forward. Camille looked at Marcus, one more glance across the space between them, the communication of a couple who had navigated the worst night of their lives and were still standing. Then she followed the agent outside. Marcus stood, rolled his shoulders, flexed his wrists. The pain was secondary to the clarity that flooded his mind, the clarity that came from the transition between cover and reveal, between the man who had absorbed violence in silence and the man who now held the authority to ensure that violence had consequences. He reached into his left jacket pocket. The credential case was where it had been all night. Pressed against his ribs, 5 ounces of metal and leather that had waited for this moment. He opened it. The gold badge caught the overhead light. The laminated ID card displayed his photograph, his name, and the words that rewrote every assumption in the room. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Supervisory Special Agent, Marcus O. Adeyemi, Civil Rights Division. He held it up, not theatrically, functionally. The way credentials were presented during official actions, angled so the badge and photo ID were simultaneously visible. Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Adeyemi, FBI Civil Rights Division, Memphis Field Office, Lead Investigator Operation HIGHLINE. He looked directly at Blanton. "Sheriff Roy Blanton, you are the subject of an active federal investigation into civil rights violations under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. Everything that has occurred tonight, from the initial traffic stop to this moment, has been documented and will be entered into evidence." The room held its breath. Blanton's face underwent a transformation that Marcus had seen before in other investigations, but that never lost its particular fascination, the collapse of certainty. The moment when a man who believed himself untouchable realized that the ground beneath him had been hollow all along, and the structure he had built his career on was already falling. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That is, you cannot. I need to see verification. Anybody can buy a badge at a surplus store." Okafor stepped forward. "ASAC Denise Okafor, Memphis Field Office." She produced a folded document from her windbreaker's interior pocket. "This is a federal search warrant issued by the Honorable Judge Patricia Kenwood, United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee. Case number 3:24-CV-0871. It authorizes the seizure of all electronic devices, communications records, and departmental files related to traffic enforcement activities in Rutherford County." She handed the warrant to Blanton. He took it the way a man takes a document he does not want to read. Fingers reluctant, grip loose, eyes scanning the first page without absorbing its contents. This warrant also covers the person and vehicle of the individual identified in our investigation as unknown subject 7. Okafor turned to Tanaka, who stood against the wall with the rigid stillness of a man who understood, with trained instincts, that movement was now the most dangerous thing he could do. "Sir, I need you to place your hands on the wall and submit to a search." Tanaka did not move. His eyes went to Blanton, a look that carried a question, a request for instruction, the automatic deference of an asset to his handler. But Blanton had nothing to offer. Blanton was standing in the middle of a converted barn, holding a federal warrant and watching his career disintegrate, word by word. "Hands on the wall." The agent nearest Tanaka repeated the command. His weapon remained at low ready. Not aimed, but present. Tanaka turned slowly, placed his palms flat against the corrugated metal wall. Spread his feet without being asked, the muscle memory of someone who had been searched before, who knew the posture, who understood the choreography of submission. The agent patted him down with methodical thoroughness. Left side first. The jacket pocket yielded a phone, black case, screen locked, then the right side, then the waistband. The weapon emerged with the particular gravity that firearms always carried when they appeared in contexts where they should not exist. A Glock 19. Compact frame. The serial number on the slide had been filed down, not removed entirely, but ground smooth enough that the digits were unreadable to the naked eye. A federal felony under 18 U.S.C. Section 922, subsection K. Possession of a firearm with an obliterated serial number, 5 years minimum. Weapon recovered. The agent held it by the trigger guard with a gloved hand, displaying it for Okafor. Serial number appears altered. Okafor looked at Tanaka. "Sir, what is your name?" Silence. Not defiance, but calculation. The silence of someone who had been trained to provide nothing, to let the interrogator fill the empty space, to wait for a lawyer before words became evidence. "We will establish identity at the field office." Okafor nodded to the agent. "Cuff him. Transport to Memphis. Evidence protocols on the weapon. Full chain of custody. Photographs before bagging." The cuffs closed on Tanaka's wrists with a sound that echoed differently than it had when they had closed on Marcus's. The same metal, the same mechanism, but a different meaning entirely. Asterisk, asterisk. "You planted evidence on a federal agent, deleted your body cam footage, and then told his wife to keep her mouth shut. If you think this is over, you have not been paying attention. Like this video now. Asterisk, asterisk." Narrator. Fry tried to leave. He had been edging toward the door since Okafor entered. Small movements, incremental, the kind of retreat that hoped to escape notice through slowness rather than speed. His laptop bag clutched to his chest. His body cam, the one he had carried in his hand rather than wearing on his chest, now shoved deep into the bag, as though hiding the device could hide the decisions he had made. He was 3 feet from the exit when the agent stationed there placed a palm flat against the frame. "Deputy, I need you to stay in the building. I was not involved in the arrest. I just came out here because the sheriff asked me to run a database query. That is all." "Then you will not mind staying while we sort things out." Fry looked at the hand, looked at the agent, looked back into the room where Blanton was reading the warrant with the slow comprehension of a man watching his own obituary being written. He stayed. Marcus approached Okafor and lowered his voice. "I need to walk you through what happened. There is more than what the dashcam captured." "The dashcam." Okafor's expression shifted. The first crack in her professional composure. "Agent Rueda lost the feed at the point of arrest. When you were placed in the patrol car, we lost visual. We had your phone call from the annex confirming location, and then the CJIS flag when they ran your name. That triggered the accelerated response. How did you end up here?" "Gunnerson and Lockhart processed us at the annex, separated us for transport. Then Lockhart called in the armed individual to transfer us to this location in an unregistered vehicle. Gray Dodge Charger, no plates. Parked in the gravel clearing outside, she called him transport. The booking deputy, Colvin, was ordered to take his break before the transfer occurred. Plausible deniability." "And the assault on Dr. Adeyemi?" "Lockhart struck her during the initial transport to the annex. Open hand across the face. Camille told me after we arrived. There is additional physical handling. Gunnerson used excessive force at the roadside and again in the annex parking lot. All of it after the body cam was deliberately deactivated. Okafor absorbed it. The information restructured the investigation in real time, transforming HIGHLINE from a pattern or practice case against line deputies into a conspiracy case that reached the elected sheriff. "Blanton conducted an interrogation here," Marcus continued. "No Miranda, no counsel, no documentation. He knew about my Saturday night drives on 231. This stop was planned, targeted. The planted evidence, the fabricated bolo, the arrest, the transfer, all coordinated to get me into this room for questioning. He wanted to know why I was driving through his jurisdiction, He knew you were surveilling. He sensed it. Did not know it was federal. Thought I might be a journalist or a civil rights investigator. Either way, his response was to arrest, plant evidence, and transport to an off-grid location using an armed civilian. That is not a traffic stop gone wrong. That is an organized criminal enterprise using law enforcement authority as cover. Okafor nodded. We need the annex, Lockhart, Colvin, the booking records, the radio logs, and the dispatch records from tonight are critical. Jolene Prater fabricated a bolo on the radio. Bolo 273, supposedly from TBI, case number TBI 24-0942. Neither the bolo nor the case number exist. I verified against the federal shared database as of Friday's update. Okafor pulled her phone. Torres, take Unit 2 to the East Side Annex. Secure all personnel present. Preserve booking records, radio logs, and surveillance footage. Nobody leaves until we have documented everything. She paused. And locate a Sergeant Patty Lockhart. She assaulted a federal witness during transport. I want her in an interview room before sunrise. She looked back at Marcus. Her expression carried something that went beyond professional assessment, a recognition of what he and Camille had endured to preserve the integrity of an investigation that could have been ended at any moment by showing a badge. You should have revealed earlier. If I had revealed at the roadside, Gunnerson walks on a bad stop. No planted evidence documented. No fabricated bolo on record. No transfer to an off-grid location. No connection to Unsub 7. And Blanton never comes out of his house on a Saturday night to personally interrogate a suspect, which means we never get the direct link between the sheriff and the enforcement operation. Marcus paused. 6 months of investigation, 347 documented stops. I was not going to let one night of discomfort collapse the case that gives those 347 people their day in court. Okafor studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to Blanton. The sheriff stood in the center of the room, holding the warrant with both hands, the paper trembling slightly. The vibration of a man whose nervous system was producing more adrenaline than his body could metabolize. Around him, agents moved with quiet efficiency, photographing the interior, bagging the laptop Fry had been using, documenting the location with the systematic thoroughness that transformed a room into an exhibit. Sheriff Blanton! Okafor's voice carried the formal cadence of someone initiating a process that could not be reversed. You are not under arrest at this time. However, you should be aware that a federal grand jury has been impaneled in the Middle District of Tennessee to consider evidence related to Operation HIGHLINE. You are a subject of that investigation. I strongly advise you to retain criminal defense counsel before making any further statements. Blanton looked up from the warrant. His eyes found Marcus, a look that carried something more complex than anger. Betrayal, the specific irrational sense of betrayal that corrupt officials experienced when the people they had victimized turned out to be the people investigating them, as though the deception of the investigation were somehow equivalent to the crimes it uncovered, as though being caught were the greater injustice. 6 months, Blanton's voice was flat. You drove through my county for 6 months. Your deputies stopped 347 black and brown drivers on Highway 231 in that same period. Marcus met the look without flinching. 89% of all stops. 4 cases of documented assault. 11 cases of planted evidence. 23 cases of fabricated charges that were later dropped, but not before the arrest cost people their jobs, their housing, or their custody arrangements. You ran a system, Sheriff, and systems leave records. Blanton said nothing. The warrant shook in his hands. Where are the keys to the gate? Okafor's question was directed at no one in particular. And who owns this property? Silence from Blanton. Silence from Fry. The question hung in the air like smoke, revealing by its lack of answer that the property's ownership was something neither man wanted to discuss. Marcus answered for them. HIGHLINE Case File, Supplemental Report 14. This property is registered to a Shell LLC called Midstate Holdings, incorporated in Wyoming in 2021. The registered agent is a P.O. box in Cheyenne, but the county tax records show property tax payments made from a personal checking account belonging to, he looked at Blanton, Roy T. Blanton. The sheriff's face drained of whatever color remained. You paid the taxes on a property you used to interrogate people you had illegally detained. Marcus let the words settle. With personal funds, from an account that federal subpoena will open by Monday morning. Okafor made a note on her phone. Add the property to the warrant addendum. I want the building processed as a crime scene. Every surface, every print, every trace. Narrator. At 11:41 p.m., the second FBI team arrived at the East Side Annex. Special Agent Carmen Torres, the woman who would spend the next 6 months dismantling Rutherford County's law enforcement infrastructure piece by piece. led a 4-agent unit through the annex's front entrance and found exactly what Marcus had described. Lockhart at the booking desk, composing an incident report that would have been the official version of tonight's events if federal intervention had arrived 30 minutes later. Colvin in the break room, staring at his phone with the haunted expression of a man who is replaying 3 seconds of inaction and wondering whether his career, his conscience, or both were irreparably damaged. And Gunnerson in the parking lot, leaning against his patrol car, smoking a cigarette with the casual posture of a man who believed the night had gone exactly as planned. Torres approached him first. "Deputy Wade Gunnerson?" He looked at her windbreaker, at the gold badge on the lanyard, at the 3 agents who had fanned out behind her, not surrounding him, not yet, but positioned with the geometric precision that eliminated escape routes without the confrontation of a formal takedown. The cigarette dropped from his fingers. "You have the right to remain silent." Torres delivered the Miranda warning with the practiced cadence of someone who had spoken these words hundreds of times but understood that each delivery carried the weight of a constitutional guarantee. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have explained them?" Gunnerson's mouth worked. The arrogance that had defined every interaction tonight, the flashlight as weapon, the ankle kick, the back slam, the cuffs cranked past tight, dissolved in the span of 4 sentences. The power dynamic that had sustained his entire approach to law enforcement, bigger, louder, more willing to escalate, was meaningless against an authority that did not need volume or violence to be absolute. "I want a lawyer." 3 words. The first intelligent decision Wade Gunnerson had made all night. "That is your right." Torres nodded to her team. "Cuff him. Transport to Memphis. Separate vehicle from the other subjects." The cuffs went on. The same model, the same mechanism. The irony was not lost on Gunnerson. His face showed it. The specific recognition of a man experiencing the system he had weaponized against others, now weaponizing itself against him. Inside the annex, Lockhart reacted differently. Torres found her at the booking desk, still typing, the incident report on her screen partially complete. The report described a routine traffic stop, lawful search, marijuana discovery, standard booking procedures, and 2 cooperative detainees who had been processed without incident and held for weekend arraignment. A work of fiction, every sentence a lie. Every procedural detail fabricated to construct an official reality that bore no resemblance to the actual events of the night. "Sergeant Lockhart," Torres stood on the opposite side of the booking desk. "Step away from the computer." Lockhart's fingers paused over the keyboard. She did not look up immediately. A deliberate delay, the same tactical patience she had used all night to control timing and information flow. When she did look up, her expression carried the composed neutrality of someone who had already decided what version of events she would present. "I am completing the incident report for a traffic arrest, standard procedure. The incident report will be preserved as evidence. Please step away from the computer and do not alter any files." "Evidence of what?" "Sergeant, you are aware that the male detainee you processed tonight is a federal agent?" Lockhart's composure held. Almost. A hairline fracture appeared at the corner of her left eye, a micro-expression that lasted less than a second, but told Torres everything she needed to know. Lockhart had not known. The stop had been about the Saturday night drives, about the suspicion of surveillance, about a couple who asked too many procedural questions. But she had not known the man she had helped arrest, detain, and transport to an unmarked building was an FBI supervisory special agent, and she had not known that the woman she had struck across the face in the back of her patrol car was married to that agent. "I need to see credentials." Lockhart's voice maintained its surface calm, but the foundation had cracked. "And I need to contact my union representative." "You will have access to legal counsel." Torres produced a second copy of the warrant. "This is a federal search warrant covering all booking records, radio communications, surveillance footage, and electronic devices associated with tonight's operations at this facility. Your personal phone and department-issued equipment are included." Lockhart read the warrant. Unlike Blanton, she read every word. The practiced attention of someone who understood legal documents and was searching for procedural weaknesses, jurisdictional gaps, anything that could be challenged later. She found nothing. The warrant was airtight. Judge Kenwood had reviewed 6 months of evidence before signing it, and the scope was broad enough to encompass every digital footprint the night had produced. "I want to make a phone call." Lockhart set the warrant down. "After processing." Torres gestured toward the door. "And Sergeant, for the record, I am advising you that you are a subject of a federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent and the right to counsel. Anything you say from this point forward may be used as evidence." Lockhart stood, adjusted her uniform. walked toward the door with the rigid posture of a woman who understood that the next 12 hours would determine whether she spent the next 12 years in federal prison or managed to negotiate something survivable. At the break room, Colvin sat with his head in his hands. Torres approached him differently. Tone softer, body language less confrontational. The young deputy was not a subject. He was, potentially, a cooperating witness. The person who had been ordered to take a break when the transfer occurred, who had seen Tanaka arrive without credentials, who had sensed something wrong, but had followed the order instead of questioning it. "Deputy Colvin," Torres sat across from him, "I need to know what you saw tonight." Colvin looked up. His eyes were red. Not from crying, from the dry, burning exhaustion of a man who had been staring at a wall for 90 minutes, knowing that he had made a choice that could not be unmade. The man with no badge. His voice was barely above a whisper. "The one Lockhart called transport. I knew he was not law enforcement. I knew it the second he walked in. No credentials, no radio, no cuffs. He carried himself like military, not police." "And what did you do?" 3 seconds of silence. The same 3 seconds he had been replaying since they occurred. The gap between his instinct and his action. The space where courage should have lived, but obedience had filled instead. "She told me to take my break, and I did." Torres nodded. No judgment in the gesture, just acknowledgement. The investigation would need his testimony, and testimony required trust, and trust required the absence of condemnation for decisions made under the pressure of institutional authority. "I'm going to need a formal statement, tonight if possible. Everything you saw from the moment the Adeyemis arrived at this facility until right now." Colvin nodded. "I will give you everything." He paused. "Is the woman okay? The doctor, she looked... When Lockhart brought her in, she looked like something had happened." Torres considered the question, decided on honesty. "Sergeant Lockhart struck her during transport." Colvin closed his eyes. The confirmation landing like a physical blow, the violence he had suspected but had not witnessed, the thing he might have prevented if 3 seconds of indecision had gone differently. "I will give you everything," he repeated. This time, the words carried the weight of someone making a choice he should have made earlier. Better late than silent. Narrator: The Dodge Charger yielded its secrets before midnight. FBI forensic technicians processed the vehicle in the gravel clearing under portable LED floodlights that turned the rural darkness into an operating theater of white light and sharp shadows. The trunk contained a gym bag with a change of clothes, a burner phone, powered off, battery removed, and a folded map of Rutherford County with 7 locations marked in pencil. 3 of the locations corresponded to addresses in the HIGHLINE case file. Addresses where complainants against the sheriff's department had lived at the time they filed their complaints. The glove compartment held registration documents for the vehicle, registered to another Shell, LLC, this one called Cedar Road Services, incorporated in Nevada. The registration was expired by 14 months. The inspection sticker was fraudulent. And under the driver's seat, in a magnetic case attached to the seat rail, the technicians found a second phone. This one was powered on. Screen locked, but the notifications visible on the lock screen included a text message received at 10:39 p.m., 18 minutes before the FBI arrived at the building. The message was from a contact saved simply as Sheriff. The preview showed the first line of the text: "Handle the couple at Annex before morning, no PA." The rest was truncated by the lock screen's character limit, but no PA had only one plausible completion in context. No paper, no documentation, no record, no evidence that the transfer or whatever followed it had ever occurred. The forensic technician photographed the lock screen, the notification, and the contact name, bagged the phone in a Faraday pouch to prevent remote wiping, logged it into the evidence chain with the timestamp, location, and the name of every person who had handled it. Marcus stood at the edge of the clearing and watched the process. The cold had deepened, 37 degrees now, the kind of rural Tennessee March night that settled into joints and reminded you that spring was a promise, not a guarantee. He had been given a bureau windbreaker by one of the agents, oversized, not his, but warm enough to stop the shaking that had started in his hands 20 minutes ago. Not from cold, from the adrenaline leaving his system, the chemical withdrawal that followed sustained threat, the body's recognition that survival was no longer in question, and the corresponding release of tension that had been held in muscle and nerve for 4 hours. Camille was in the back of the lead Suburban, warm, photographed, her injuries documented by an agent with EMT training, the wrist bruising measured and mapped, the facial mark from Lockhart's slap recorded in high-resolution images that would become exhibits in a courtroom 6 months from now. She was speaking into a digital recorder, providing her own witness statement with the same clinical precision she used for surgical case notes. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from a blocked number, Okafor's secure line. Gunnerson's patrol vehicle processed at the annex. 3 additional Ziploc bags recovered from his trunk kit. Same size and type as the bag planted in your car. Batch analysis pending, but preliminary field testing shows consistent material. 3 more bags? The same bags. Gunnerson had been carrying a kit, pre-packaged plant material, ready for deployment, portable enough to fit in a trunk compartment alongside standard patrol equipment. How many other vehicles had received one of those bags during a Saturday night stop on Highway 231? How many other people had been arrested, charged, processed, and convicted based on evidence that arrived in a deputy's trunk before it appeared in theirs? The question answered itself in the case file. 11 documented instances of suspected planted evidence across the HIGHLINE investigation period. 11 people whose lives had been disrupted by a crime committed against them by the person who arrested them for it. Marcus put his phone away, looked at the building, looked at the gravel clearing where Blanton's personal vehicle, a white Ford F-150 with a Sheriff's Department parking decal on the windshield, sat next to Fry's department-issue sedan. Both vehicles were now crime scenes. Both would be towed to the FBI's evidence facility in Memphis for processing, and somewhere inside the building, Blanton was still standing with the warrant in his hands, surrounded by agents who were photographing every surface, every print, every fiber, waiting for the moment when the warrant's implications finished settling and the reality of his situation became fully, irreversibly clear. That moment would come. It always did. Marcus had seen it happen in other investigations. The delay between information and comprehension, the gap between knowing you were caught and understanding what being caught actually meant, the loss of the badge, the loss of the pension, the loss of the title that had defined your identity for 3 decades, the prospect of a federal courtroom, a jury of citizens, and the particular justice of being judged by the same system you had used to judge others. For Blanton, that moment was still approaching. For Gunnerson, it had already arrived, the cuffs on his wrist telling him everything the warrant's language had not yet made real. For Lockhart, it would come in an interview room in Memphis, when Torres laid out the evidence and offered the choice that federal prosecutors always offered: cooperate and testify, or go to trial and gamble your freedom on a jury's sympathy for a sergeant who had slapped a handcuffed woman. For Tanaka, the moment was different. He sat in the back of a Suburban, with his hands cuffed and his expression empty, saying nothing, requesting nothing, providing nothing. The silence of a man who had been in custody before and knew that silence was the only defense available to someone whose phone contained a text message from a sheriff ordering him to handle 2 people and leave no paper trail. The silence would hold. Marcus knew it. Tanaka had the training and the temperament to maintain silence through the initial processing, through the first interview attempts, through the arraignment and the bail hearing and the early stages of pretrial negotiation. He would wait for leverage, wait for the prosecution to show its hand, wait for the moment when cooperation became more valuable than loyalty. And in the meantime, the phone would talk, the map would talk, the gun with the filed serial number would talk, the cell tower data that placed him at 3 complainants' addresses would talk. The evidence would construct the narrative that Tanaka's silence refused to provide. That was how federal cases worked. Not through confessions, through documentation, through the patient, systematic accumulation of facts that made denial irrelevant and silence indistinguishable from admission. Narrator. At 1:15 a.m. on Sunday, March 9th, Marcus and Camille sat in the back of the lead Suburban as it pulled out of the gravel clearing and onto the unpaved road. The building behind them was now fully illuminated. Floodlights on tripods, evidence markers on the floor, an FBI forensic team that would work through the night and into the morning, cataloging everything the building contained and everything its surfaces remembered. The drive to Memphis took 93 minutes. They sat together in the back seat, no partition between them and the agent driving, no handcuffs, no mesh, no cage. Just the hum of the highway and the particular silence of 2 people who had too much to say and not enough distance from the events to say it. 40 minutes into the drive, Camille leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder. The gesture was small, private, unremarkable, the kind of thing that happened in cars every night between couples who were tired and needed contact. But in this car, after this night, the weight of her head against his shoulder carried everything the previous 4 hours had contained: the fear she had controlled, the pain she had documented, the fury she had channeled into precision, the trust she had placed in a man who had chosen to let her suffer through a corrupt system rather than reveal the badge that would have stopped it. You knew. Her voice was quiet, not accusatory, observational. When he pulled us over, you knew it was going to happen. I suspected. The drives were designed to attract attention, but I did not know it would be tonight. And I did not know they would go this far. The building, the man with the gun, That was not in any operational briefing I signed off on. She was right. When Marcus had brought Camille into the investigation's operational awareness 6 months ago, a requirement given that she would be in the vehicle during the Saturday night drives, the risk assessment had described potential traffic stops, possible arrest, and the standard indignities of racial profiling encounters. It had not described transport to an unmarked building by an armed civilian with a filed serial number weapon and a text message from the county sheriff ordering him to make 2 people disappear from the system. No, it was not. I need you to hear this. She lifted her head, looked at him directly. I understand why you did not show the badge. I understand the case. I understand the 347 people. But I need you to understand something too. He waited. When Lockhart hit me in that car, open hand, across the mouth, hard enough that I tasted blood, I was alone, handcuffed, in the back of a vehicle driven by someone who had already decided I was not a person whose pain mattered, and the man I trust more than anyone in the world was in a different car, holding a badge that could have prevented it, and he chose not to use it. The words landed. Marcus absorbed them the way he absorbed evidence, completely, without flinching, without the defense mechanisms that most people deployed when confronted with the cost of their decisions. I know. 2 words. Insufficient. But honest. I would do it again, Camille said. For the case, for the people. But I need you to sit with what it cost, not the bruises. Those heal. The moment. The specific moment when I realized that no one was coming, that the system had me, that the person who should have been my safety net had chosen, correctly and deliberately, to let me fall. Marcus reached for her hand. She let him take it. The contact was different from the handcuffed grip in the Charger. No metal between them now, just skin and the warmth that came from circulation restored and adrenaline faded. I will sit with it. He meant it, would carry it, would let it inform every decision he made from this point forward, the weight of a choice that was operationally correct and personally devastating, the kind of choice that federal agents were trained to make and that marriages were not designed to survive. Whether theirs would survive it remained to be seen. That was a question for months ahead, for conversations in kitchens and therapists' offices, and the quiet negotiations that happened between people who loved each other and had also hurt each other in the service of something larger than themselves. For now, they held hands in the back of a Suburban on Interstate 40 at 2 in the morning, watching the headlights of other vehicles pass in the opposite direction. Other lives, other Saturday nights, other people going home without knowing how close the system had come to consuming 2 more. Asterisk, asterisk. 347 traffic stops, 89% black and brown, 11 planted evidence bags, 1 armed enforcer with a text from the sheriff. If this story shook you, subscribe and share. Because the justice system these people built needs an audience to hold it accountable. Asterisk, asterisk, narrator. Monday morning came with the mechanical inevitability of government process. At 9 a.m., the United States Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Tennessee filed sealed indictments against Deputy Wade Gunnerson on 4 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law in violation of 18 U.S.C., Section 242, evidence tampering, false arrest, and assault on a federal agent. Each count carried its own sentencing range. Combined, the exposure exceeded 30 years. Gunnerson's union attorney, a man named Phil Kessinger, who had spent 20 years defending officers against disciplinary actions and had never handled a federal criminal case, arrived at the Memphis field office at 7:30 a.m. and spent 90 minutes with his client in an interview room. When he emerged, his expression carried the particular gravity of a lawyer who had just learned that his client's situation was significantly worse than the initial phone call had suggested. My client will cooperate, Kessinger told the AUSA, to a point. He wants to know what cooperation looks like in terms of sentencing exposure. The answer came from Assistant United States Attorney Rachel Drummond, 41, former DOJ Civil Rights Division, the kind of prosecutor who viewed police misconduct cases not as career stepping stones, but as moral obligations. She had reviewed the HIGHLINE file over the weekend and had arrived at work on Monday with the focused intensity of someone who understood that the window for cooperation narrowed with every hour. Cooperation looks like full disclosure, Drummond told Kessinger. Names, dates, methods, the chain of command, every stop he planted evidence on, every bolo that Prater fabricated, every time Lockhart covered for him, and most importantly, every interaction he has had with Sheriff Blanton regarding the targeting of specific drivers. Kessinger asked for time. Drummond gave him until 5 p.m. The clock started. At 10 a.m., Jolene Prater was arrested at her home in Murfreesboro. The charges: conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law and making false statements in connection with federal investigation. The dispatch recordings from Saturday night were already transcribed, time-stamped, and cross-referenced against the actual BOLO database. The fabricated alert, BOLO 273, case number TBI 240942, existed nowhere in any law enforcement database in Tennessee. Prater had created it in real time, spoken it into existence over the radio, and generated the paper trail that Gunnerson needed to justify a search he had already decided to conduct. She requested a lawyer immediately, said nothing else. The silence of a woman who understood, after 23 years in dispatch, that the radio recordings were the prosecution's strongest evidence and that her own voice was the weapon being used against her. At 11 a.m., Sheriff Roy Blanton held a press conference. He stood behind a podium at the Rutherford County Administration Building, flanked by his personal attorney. Not the county attorney, who had recused himself from anything related to HIGHLINE, but a private criminal defense lawyer from Nashville named Garrett Stiles, who charged $600 an hour and whose client list included 3 state legislators and a former county mayor. Last night, 2 of my deputies conducted a routine traffic stop on Highway 231. Blanton read from prepared notes, his voice carrying the practiced steadiness of a man who had spent 30 years delivering public statements and knew that tone mattered more than content. During the course of that stop, a federal investigation that I was previously unaware of became active. I want to assure the citizens of Rutherford County that this department has always operated within the bounds of the law, and we will cooperate fully with any federal inquiry. A reporter from the Murfreesboro Daily News Journal raised her hand. Sheriff, the FBI has stated that the traffic stop involved planted evidence and fabricated dispatch records. Can you comment on those allegations? Those are allegations, not facts. The federal investigation is ongoing, and I will not comment on specifics that might compromise my deputies' due process rights. Another reporter, this one from Nashville's WSMV, Channel 4, the kind of outlet whose coverage reached the state capitol and the governor's desk. Sheriff Blanton, are you personally a subject of the federal investigation? Stiles leaned toward the microphone. The sheriff has been informed that Operation HIGHLINE involves his department. He has not been charged with any crime. Any further questions regarding the investigation should be directed to the United States Attorney's Office. The press conference lasted 11 minutes. Blanton answered 4 questions, deflected 9, and concluded with a statement about his 30-year commitment to public safety that would have been convincing if the federal warrant executed 12 hours earlier had not included his personal checking account records and a photograph of a text message ordering an armed civilian to handle 2 people at a secret location. By noon, the story had reached national media. The Associated Press wire carried a 300-word summary. CNN ran a segment during the lunch hour. The details were irresistible. A black couple, an FBI agent undercover in his own investigation, planted drugs, a corrupt sheriff, an armed enforcer, a building in the woods. The narrative wrote itself, and it wrote itself in terms that confirmed what millions of Americans already believed about the intersection of race and policing in the rural South. Narrator: the weeks that followed moved at the speed of federal process, which is to say, slowly enough to frustrate anyone who expected justice to arrive on the same timeline as outrage, but steadily enough that momentum, once established, became impossible to reverse. Wednesday, March 12th. The federal grand jury returned a 12-count indictment against Deputy Wade Gunnerson, Sergeant Patty Lockhart, Dispatcher Jolene Prater, and Kira Tanaka. The charges range from civil rights violations to evidence tampering to conspiracy. Tanaka's indictment included the additional charge of possession of a firearm with an obliterated serial number under 18 U.S.C. Section 922K, and a separate count of being an unlicensed armed agent operating under the direction of a public official, a state-level charge that the Tennessee Attorney General's office had agreed to pursue in parallel with the federal case. Sheriff Blanton was not indicted, not yet. The grand jury returned a target letter instead, the formal notification that he was under continuing investigation and that additional charges were being considered pending the outcome of cooperation negotiations with the other defendants. The target letter was a prosecutorial tool. AUSA Drummond understood that Blanton's indictment was inevitable, but that its timing mattered. If Gunnerson or Lockhart cooperated first, providing testimony about the sheriff's direct involvement in targeting specific drivers, in approving planted evidence, in deploying Tanaka, the indictment against Blanton would be stronger, built on testimony rather than inference, supported by insiders rather than outsiders. The race to cooperate began. Gunnerson's attorney came back first. At 4:45 p.m. on the Monday deadline, 15 minutes before Drummond's window closed, Kessinger called the AUSA's office and said his client was prepared to provide a full proffer, an off-the-record preview of his testimony, offered in exchange for a potential reduction in charges. The proffer session lasted 6 hours. Gunnerson, seated in an interview room at the Memphis field office with his attorney, a court reporter, and AUSA Drummond, described a system that had been operating for nearly 4 years. The system was simple. Blanton identified vehicles whose drivers were perceived as threats: civil rights investigators, journalists, activists, anyone whose presence in the county might attract attention to policing practices, and directed his deputies to stop, search, and if necessary arrest those drivers using fabricated pretexts and planted evidence. Prater's role was to create the radio documentation that made the stops appear legitimate in the dispatch log. Lockhart's role was to supervise the scenes and ensure that the narrative remained consistent across all participating officers. And Tanaka's role, recruited through a retired deputy named Russ Mayfield, who ran a private security company called Volunteer Shield LLC, was to handle the situations that required physical intimidation rather than procedural manipulation. "How many times was Tanaka deployed?" Drummond asked. Gunnerson paused, calculated. 7 that I know of. Maybe more. Blanton dealt with him directly. We just knew that when a problem needed to go away, the kid showed up. Define go away. Witnesses who had filed complaints, people who had recorded encounters, anyone who had evidence that could make the department look bad. Tanaka would visit them. Not threaten. Just visit. Show up at their house, their workplace. Let them know they had been noticed. Most people got the message. And the ones who did not? Another pause, longer. The calculation of a man weighing the value of full disclosure against the risk of self-incrimination. One guy, a truck driver named Darnell Hobbs, stopped on 231 about 18 months ago. He did not get the message. Filed a complaint with the ACLU after Tanaka visited his house. 2 days later, his rig's brake lines were cut while it was parked at the truck stop off I-24. He survived, but the complaint disappeared. Drummond made a note. The note would generate a separate investigation. The investigation would take months. The brake line incident, if provable, would transform the case from civil rights violations into attempted murder. A jurisdictional escalation that would bring additional federal resources and additional pressure on everyone in the chain of command. Did Blanton order the brake line incident? I do not know. Blanton never gave direct orders for that kind of thing. He would say something like, handle it or make the problem go away. Tanaka interpreted. Blanton maintained distance. Plausible deniability. The architecture of every organized criminal enterprise. Insulation between the person who benefits and the person who acts. The same structure that made mob prosecutions difficult and that made RICO statutes necessary. Drummond asked about the Saturday night drives. About the moment Blanton first noticed the Honda Accord and its black driver. About the decision to target Marcus Adeyemi specifically. It was about 3 weeks ago, Gunnerson said. Blanton called a meeting. Just me, Lockhart, and Prater. Said there was a vehicle running 231 every Saturday. Same time, same route. He thought it was surveillance. Said to pull it over when the opportunity came and find out who the driver was. I asked what if the driver was clean. Blanton said, then make him dirty. Make him dirty. Drummond repeated the words for the court reporter. Those were his exact words? Yes, ma'am, the proffer continued. 6 hours of testimony that dismantled the official version of Rutherford County law enforcement and replaced it with the version that 347 drivers had experienced, the version where badges were weapons, traffic stops were traps, and the system protected itself at any cost. Narrator. On Thursday, April 3rd, 26 days after the traffic stop on Highway 231, the Department of Justice announced a pattern or practice investigation into the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. The announcement came from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division in Washington, delivered by the Assistant Attorney General in a press conference that attracted national media coverage. The investigation would examine traffic stop data, use of force records, complaint handling, and the department's internal accountability mechanisms. A team of federal monitors would be deployed to the county within 60 days. If the investigation found a pattern of constitutional violations, and 6 months of HIGHLINE data strongly suggested it would, the DOJ would seek a consent decree, a binding legal agreement that would place the Sheriff's Department under federal oversight for a minimum of 5 years, mandatory reforms, independent monitors, regular audits, the machinery of institutional accountability, slow and imperfect but real, grinding forward with the momentum that only the federal government could generate. Sheriff Blanton resigned on April 7th. No press conference this time. A 1-paragraph letter delivered to the county commission, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. His pension, 30 years of accumulated benefits, was placed on administrative hold pending the outcome of the federal investigation. His attorney negotiated the terms. Blanton would retain the pension only if no criminal conviction resulted from HIGHLINE. If convicted, the pension reverted to the county. The county commission appointed an interim sheriff, a captain from the department's training division who had no connection to the Highway 231 operations, and whose first official act was to suspend all traffic stops on that stretch of road pending a comprehensive review of stop-and-search protocols. Gunnerson pleaded guilty on April 14th. 2 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law and evidence tampering. The plea agreement, negotiated by Kessinger with Drummond's office, carried a recommended sentence of 36 to 48 months in federal prison. The judge would determine the final sentence at a hearing scheduled for July. Lockhart's case took longer. Her attorney, a former federal prosecutor from Nashville named Iris Caldwell, sharper and more experienced than Kessinger, fought every evidentiary motion, challenged the warrant's scope, and filed a suppression motion arguing that the dash cam footage was obtained without Lockhart's consent. The suppression motion failed. Judge Kenwood ruled that the dash cam operated on a public highway where no reasonable expectation of privacy existed, and that the footage captured at the roadside was admissible in its entirety. The ruling was clean, well-reasoned, and consistent with Fourth Amendment precedent established in cases going back decades. Faced with the dash cam footage, Gunnerson's proffer testimony, Colvin's witness statement, and the medical photographs of Camille's injuries, Lockhart entered a guilty plea on May 2nd. 1 count: conspiracy to deprive civil rights. Recommended sentence: 24 to 30 months. Prater pleaded guilty the following week. 1 count: conspiracy. 18 to 24 months recommended. Tanaka remained silent. His attorney, a federal public defender named Karen Ostrowski, appointed after Tanaka demonstrated inability to afford private counsel, filed standard pretrial motions but offered no cooperation. Tanaka said nothing in his arraignment beyond "not guilty," said nothing during pretrial hearings beyond responses required by judicial procedure, said nothing when the prosecution's discovery package landed on Ostrowski's desk. 412 pages of evidence, including the phone, the text message, the gun, the cell tower data, the map with 7 marked locations, and the preliminary forensic analysis of the brake line incident on Darnell Hobbs's truck. The trial was scheduled for September. 8 months after a traffic stop on Highway 231 that lasted 41 minutes and took 4 years to investigate. Narrator: in late May, Marcus returned to Highway 231, not in the Honda Accord. That vehicle was in the FBI evidence facility, its dash cam footage preserved in the case file, its trunk the documented crime scene where a deputy had planted evidence on a federal agent. Marcus drove a bureau vehicle this time, a nondescript gray sedan, the kind of car that attracted no attention on a 2-lane highway in rural Tennessee. He drove the same route, same direction, same time of evening, though the sun stayed up later now, May's lengthening days pushing sunset past 8 and filling the fields on either side of the road with golden light that made everything look softer than it was. The road was quieter. Traffic stops on 231 had dropped to near zero since the interim sheriff's suspension order. The deputies who remained on patrol, the ones who had not been indicted, not been suspended, not been placed on administrative leave pending internal review, drove the highway with the careful restraint of people who understood that every action was now being watched. Marcus pulled onto the gravel shoulder at mile marker 41, the same spot where Gunnerson had pulled him over 10 weeks earlier. The gravel still bore tire marks from the patrol car, though rain and traffic had softened them. The shoulder grass had grown back where Camille's surgical bag had spilled. The landscape had healed. The system had not. He sat in the car for 15 minutes, not documenting, not investigating, just sitting, looking at the stretch of road where the night had turned, where the investigation had gone from data collection to personal experience, where the abstract violence of statistics had become the specific violence of a deputy's hand on his spine and his wife's blood on her lip. 347 stops, the number that had driven the investigation, the number that quantified a pattern and justified federal intervention. But each of those stops was also a person, a name, a night, a moment when someone's ordinary drive home had been interrupted by flashing lights and the particular terror of being black in a jurisdiction where the sheriff had told his deputies to make people dirty. Marcus did not know all 347 names. The case file contained them, but he had not memorized each one. He carried the weight of the number without carrying the individual faces, the individual stories, the individual costs. That was the limitation of federal investigations. They documented patterns, they prosecuted systems, they produced consent decrees and guilty pleas and sentencing hearings, but they did not undo the nights, did not restore the jobs lost to fabricated arrests, did not repair the trust destroyed by a system that was supposed to protect and instead predated. Justice, when it came, was partial. Gunnerson would serve time. Lockhart would serve time. Prater would serve time. Tanaka would likely serve time, assuming the trial produced the conviction that the evidence overwhelmingly supported. Blanton would face charges. The grand jury was still deliberating. Drummond was still building. The target letter was still active. But the system that had allowed all of it, the institutional culture, the hiring practices, the oversight failures, the union protections, the political incentives that rewarded tough-on-crime rhetoric and punished accountability, that system was larger than any indictment could reach. The consent decree would address some of it. The federal monitors would watch some of it. The training reforms and policy changes and civilian oversight board that the DOJ would eventually mandate would prevent some of it. Some. Not all. Never all. Marcus started the car, pulled onto Highway 231, drove south toward Shelbyville, then turned around and drove north toward Murfreesboro, the route he had driven 6 times before the night that changed everything, the route he would never need to drive again. The investigation was transferring to the DOJ's Permanent Civil Rights Team. His role as lead agent was concluding. A new SSA would take over the consent decree monitoring, someone with experience in long-term institutional reform, someone who could spend 5 years embedded in Rutherford County's law enforcement culture and push for changes that would outlast any individual case. Marcus would return to Memphis, to the field office, to the next case file, the next pattern, the next jurisdiction where the data showed what nobody wanted to see. The work continued. It always continued, because the patterns were not confined to one county or one state or one highway. They existed everywhere. The intersection of power and prejudice created the conditions for abuse, and they would persist as long as the systems that enabled them remained unreformed. He drove north. The sun set behind him, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reflected off the highway's surface and turned the asphalt to copper. Beautiful, indifferent, the landscape unchanged by what had happened on it. Narrator. On a Tuesday evening in late June, Marcus and Camille sat on the back porch of their Memphis home. The yard was small, a rectangle of grass bordered by a wooden fence, a single magnolia tree that Camille had planted the year they moved in. The tree was blooming, white flowers heavy and fragrant in the humid air. They had not talked about the night in detail since the car ride home, not because the subject was forbidden, but because the processing was still happening, in therapy sessions that Marcus attended on Thursdays and Camille on Mondays, in the careful language they used around the bruises that had faded, but whose memory remained, in the way Camille sometimes paused at traffic lights on dark roads and checked her mirrors with an intensity that had nothing to do with driving. But tonight, Camille brought a letter to the porch. A manila envelope opened, the contents partially removed. She set it on the table between their chairs. The victim witness coordinator sent this today. 23 of the 347 have agreed to provide impact statements for the sentencing hearings. Their names are in here. She paused. One of them is Darnell Hobbs, the truck driver. Marcus looked at the envelope, did not open it. The names inside represented something he had worked toward for 6 months and would spend the rest of his career thinking about: the moment when patterns became people, when statistics became testimony, when the abstract architecture of injustice was given voice by the individuals who had been trapped inside it. The consent decree was signed today, he said. 5 years, federal monitors, mandatory reforms, quarterly data reporting, civilian oversight board with subpoena power. Camille nodded. She knew. Had followed the case's progress with the attention of someone who had been inside the system and understood, with the specificity of personal experience, what reform meant and what it could not mean. Will it work? The question carried no judgment, just genuine inquiry. The question of a scientist who understood that systems resist change and that reform without enforcement was indistinguishable from inaction. Some of it. Marcus looked at the magnolia tree. The monitors will catch the obvious violations. The data reporting will make patterns visible before they become entrenched. The oversight board will give community members a seat at the table they have never had. But the culture, the thing that made Gunnerson believe he could plant drugs on a black man and face no consequences, that does not change with a consent decree. That changes with generations, with hiring, with training, with the slow, exhausting work of making accountability feel normal instead of exceptional. So no. So partially, which is all any single case ever achieves. Camille picked up the envelope, looked at it, set it down again. Lockhart called me from county lockup 3 weeks ago, through her attorney. Marcus looked at her. This was new. She had not mentioned it. She wanted to apologize. Her attorney said it was part of a victim reconciliation program she had enrolled in. Voluntary. The apology was scripted. I recognize the harm I caused and take full responsibility for my actions, Camille's voice was flat. Scripted, like a form letter, like the harm she caused was a line item she could check off on a list of sentencing mitigation strategies. What did you say? I told her attorney that I did not need her apology, that I needed her department to stop hitting people, and that the difference between what she wanted, forgiveness, and what I wanted, systemic change, was the entire reason the federal government was now running her former workplace. Marcus smiled. Small, brief. The smile of a man who was married to someone whose clarity he admired, even when, especially when, it was directed at things he could not fix. They sat in silence as the June evening deepened. Fireflies appeared in the yard, small lights blinking in the darkness, each one visible for a moment before disappearing. Temporary. Recurring. The kind of light that existed only because the darkness made it possible. The Tanaka trial is in September, Marcus said. Drummond wants me on the stand. You will testify. Yes. About all of it. About all of it. Camille reached across the table, took his hand, the same gesture from the back of the Suburban 3 months ago. But different now. No metal between them, no cuffs, no cage. Just the connection of two people who had survived something together and were still deciding, day by day, what that survival meant and what it would cost. One more thing. She said it quietly. The envelope from the victim witness coordinator. There is a second letter inside, separate from the impact statements. Marcus looked at the envelope, looked at Camille. She nodded toward it. Open it. He opened it. Inside, beneath the stack of impact statements, a single sheet of paper. FBI letterhead, addressed to Dr. Marcus Adeyemi. The letter acknowledged her cooperation during Operation HIGHLINE, acknowledged the personal risk she had assumed, acknowledged the injuries she had sustained, and in the final paragraph, it noted that the investigation had been referred to the DOJ's Inspector General for a review of whether Bureau operational protocols adequately protected the family members of undercover agents during live tactical situations. In other words, the Bureau was examining whether Marcus's decision to maintain cover while his wife was assaulted had been the right call, whether the investigation's operational plan should have included provisions for revealing agent identity when physical harm to a family member was imminent, whether the case that had produced 23 impact statements and a 5-year consent decree had been built at a cost that the institution should not have allowed. The review would take months. Its conclusions would generate policy recommendations. The recommendations might change future operations, or they might be filed in a cabinet and forgotten, the institutional equivalent of a consent decree that existed on paper but not in practice. Marcus folded the letter, set it on the table. Well, he looked at the magnolia tree, at the fireflies, at the woman beside him whose hand was still in his. I suppose that is justice. Partial justice, Camille corrected. Is there any other kind? The question settled between them like the evening air, warm, heavy, carrying the scent of magnolia blossoms and the faint sound of traffic from the highway that ran behind their neighborhood. A highway in Memphis, not Highway 231, not Rutherford County, a different road in a different place, carrying different people to different destinations. But somewhere on that highway, somewhere on every highway, in every county, in every state, the pattern continued. Different names, different badges, different stretches of asphalt, the same system, the same imbalance. The same moment when blue lights appeared in a rearview mirror and the night's outcome depended not on what you had done, but on what you looked like. The consent decree covered Rutherford County, 5 years, federal monitors, mandatory reforms. But there were 3,093 other counties in the United States, and the magnolia tree bloomed indifferent to all of them. Narrator, September 14th. The trial of Kira Tanaka opened in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee, Judge Patricia Kenwood presiding. The courtroom was full. Media in the gallery, victim advocates in the first 3 rows, a small cluster of law enforcement officers whose presence was either solidarity or surveillance, depending on which side of the case they sat. Marcus took the stand on the second day, testified for 4 hours, described the traffic stop, the planted evidence, the transport to the building, Tanaka's arrival, the concealed weapon, the gate, the boots, the keys, described the text message on the phone recovered from the charger, described the cell tower data that placed Tanaka at the addresses of 3 previous HIGHLINE complainants on dates that corresponded to the withdrawal of their complaints. Cross-examination lasted 2 hours. Ostrowski, competent, thorough, constrained by the weight of evidence that left little room for reasonable doubt, focused on Marcus's decision to maintain cover. Why had he not revealed his identity earlier? Why had he allowed the situation to escalate? whether the investigation's need for evidence had led federal agents to place civilians, specifically his wife, at unnecessary risk. Marcus answered each question directly. Yes, he had maintained cover to preserve the investigation. Yes, the situation had escalated beyond what the operational plan anticipated. Yes, his wife had been injured during the period when he possessed the credentials that would have stopped the encounter. And yes, he would make the same decision again. Not because the injuries were acceptable, but because the alternative was the continued operation of a system that had victimized hundreds of people over 4 years. The jury deliberated for 9 hours, returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Tanaka sat motionless when the verdict was read, the same expressionless composure he had maintained since the night of his arrest. No reaction, no acknowledgement. The mask held. Whatever existed beneath it, regret, defiance, indifference, remained invisible. Sentencing was scheduled for December, and somewhere in Tanaka's phone, the phone now entered permanently into evidence, its encrypted contents extracted and cataloged by FBI forensic technicians. The contact list contained 14 names. 3 had been identified: Blanton, Gunnerson, and Russ Mayfield, the retired deputy who ran Volunteer Shield LLC. 11 remained unidentified, labeled only by initials or single-word aliases. 1 contact was saved as Magistrate. The FBI had not yet determined who Magistrate was. The investigation continued. Subpoenas were issued. Cell tower records were requested. The slow machinery of federal process turned toward this name the way it turned toward every thread that emerged from the unraveling of a system, patiently, methodically, without the urgency of a headline, but with the persistence that eventually brought every hidden connection into the light. Or did not. Because some threads led to walls. Some contacts led to burner phones that had been destroyed. Some aliases led to people who had the resources and the foresight to erase their footprints before investigators arrived. Magistrate might be identified in weeks, or months, or never. The investigation would continue regardless, following the thread until it ended, wherever that end might be. That was the nature of the work: patient, incomplete, ongoing, like justice itself, always partial, always delayed, always dependent on people who were willing to drive the same highway on the same Saturday night week after week, building a case that might take years to produce results that would never be sufficient. Marcus understood this, had understood it since the day he joined the Bureau, would understand it on the day he left. The work continued. The highway remained. And somewhere in the dark, on a stretch of road between 2 small towns in a county that now operated under federal oversight, a pair of headlights appeared in a rearview mirror. Blue and red lights flashed. A voice on a loudspeaker issued an instruction that might be lawful or might not. And the driver, alone at night, on a road with no witnesses, made the same calculation that 347 people before them had made, the same calculation Marcus Adeyemi had made on a Saturday night in March. Comply, document, survive, and hope that somewhere, someone was watching.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.